Chapter 3168. The Lian heir led the army this time as a representative of Prince Lian and shouldered a heavy responsibility. The others could admit defeat and surrender, but he could not. If he surrendered to Ji Tianxing, he would be trampling on Prince Lian's face. Since he couldn't win, the Lian heir would rather die in battle. And he wanted to die tragically and heroically. This way, even if he died, Prince Lian would confer him a posthumous title and reward him and treat his family well. If he surrendered and survived, the fate of his family could be imagined. Given Prince Lian's personality, he would definitely execute his entire family to vent his hatred and resentment. Bastard, die. The Lian heir transformed into a streak of light that pierced through the night sky, charging in front of Ji Tianxing and slashing down with his twin sabers. You're courting death. Ji Tianxing frowned slightly, then expressionlessly raised his right hand and swept out with his sword. It was just a casual sweep of the sword, seemingly without any order. But his attainments in the sword Dao had long reached the pinnacle. Every move he made contained the true intent of the sword Dao and the power of multiple laws. Boom! With a dull explosion, the two dazzling saber lights exploded into pieces. The Lian heir was also sent flying, vomiting blood as he crashed 100 miles away. Even though Ji Tianxing was the same as him, both being 8th level Divine Lord realm strength. But the difference in their combat strength was huge, at least 10 times greater. Even if the Lian heir used all his strength, he could not block Ji Tianxing's casual strike. Seeing the Lian heir sent flying with a single move and heavily injured, everyone trembled with fear, chills running down their spines. The dozens of high-ranked divine lords were all pondering. The Lian heir and Liang Jianqing were the strongest among them, but they could not block a single move from Ji Tianxing. If it were them, they would probably be insta-killed by Ji Tianxing. As a result, many high-ranked divine lords were nervous. But the Lian heir had already attacked. They could not just stand there and watch, so they could only brace themselves and charge. Kill. Everyone attack together. I would rather die standing than live kneeling. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang'an both roared loudly. With hearts full of solemn and stirring feelings, they launched an attack on Ji Tianxing. The two of them attacked from the left and right, brandishing their divine swords and using their ultimate killing moves. Limitless Sword Ripple. Sky-splitting Sun Chop. Even though the two of them had given it their all and unleashed their strongest killing moves, the two of them were unable to stop each other. The giant sword that was thousands of feet long and had hundreds of dazzling sword lights. Its power was indeed astonishing. However, their sword Dao divine abilities paled in comparison to Ji Tianxing's. Ji Tianxing put his left hand behind his back and held the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand. In an instant, 36 sword lights shot out. Sun-shattering sword. 36 rainbow-colored sword lights instantly destroyed the giant sword and the hundreds of dazzling sword lights. Bang, bang, bang. Muffled explosions could be heard as fragments of divine light rained down from the sky. Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang'an were both hit by a few swords. Blood spurted out from their bodies as they screamed and flew backward for dozens of miles. Ji Tianxing used only one move to heavily injure Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang'an. Such divine might cause the 40-plus high divine lords to be even more terrified and fearful. But the crowd had already followed Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang'an, roaring as they launched an attack. He couldn't give up halfway, right? Everyone had no choice but to grit their teeth and unleash all their divine abilities to besiege him. Swish. Swish. Everyone was using all kinds of divine abilities and consummate skills. Dazzling divine light shot out and covered the sky. The saber light and sword shadows that filled the sky were like a torrential flood, pouring down on Ji Tianxing and drowning his figure. At this moment, the 15,000 giant swords floating in the night sky emitted a dazzling light and stabbed down at the crowd. Swish, 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 swish. Violent sword intent enveloped the 40-plus high divine lords. Bam, 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 boom, boom. There was an earth-shattering explosion as the divine abilities and consummate skills that everyone had used were shattered by the sword light. Immediately after, the dense rain of sword light blasted into the crowd, drowning the figures of many high divine lords. The high divine lords who had been charging forward bravely without regard for their own safety were instantly scattered by the rain of sword light and fled pathetically. However, fleeing and dodging were useless. The area within 100 miles was completely filled with sword light. There was nowhere to run. Blood mist burst out from the crowd and shrill screams could be heard. One after another, high divine lords had their limbs and divine bodies severed by the sword light before exploding into clouds of bloody mist. Even the godheads that were fleeing in panic could not escape the fate of being killed by the sword light. They were all shattered into pieces. The number of high divine lords was rapidly dwindling. Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, and Yi Liangan were also severely injured and were powerless to reverse the situation. Not far away, the 300-plus elites watched with trepidation. Their souls almost left their bodies and they were in extreme despair. Many people lost their will to fight as their willpower collapsed. They could no longer fight as they fled in all directions in a frenzy, letting out indistinct and horrified roars. Soon misfortune befell them. More than 2,000 giant swords flew over, forming a dozen sword blade storms that swept through the crowd. Anyone who was swept up by the storm, regardless of whether they were 9th-level celestial gods or low-level divine lords, was smashed into pieces and their godheads shattered. In less than 100 breaths, the 300-plus elites were all killed by the sword light. Not a single one was left. And at this moment, more than half of the 40-plus high divine lords were killed by the 10,000 swords. Only a dozen or so high divine lords were left and they were still resisting, struggling to hold on. These dozen or so people were the strongest and most powerful among the many experts. They included Lian Er, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liangan, the 4 directions divine generals, and the 3 elders Pexing. However, the 13 high divine lords were all covered in blood. Their hair was disheveled and they were severely injured. They looked very wretched. The high divine lords with the worst injuries had their arms or legs cut off. One of them was almost cut in half at the waist. At this point, the battle was about to end. No matter how the 13 high divine lords erupted or what trump cards they used, they could not change the outcome of their deaths. And Ji Tianqing was still completely unharmed. The heaven-destroying sword formation was still intact, operating firmly and powerfully. 7 Stars Sword. While a high divine lord was blocking the sword rain, Ji Tianqing appeared behind him and stabbed repeatedly with his sword. With a muffled explosion, the high divine lord did not even have the chance to scream before his divine body was destroyed. Pieces of flesh and blood splattered everywhere. The others were so angry that their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. They all charged at Ji Tianqing and attacked with all their might. Ji Tianqing's figure flashed and he teleported behind a high divine lord and stabbed rapidly with his sword. Bam! The Burial of Heaven's sword instantly stabbed into the high divine lord's back. A dazzling divine light burst out and blasted him into smithereens. A godhead flew out from the bloody mist and instinctively fled into the distance. Ji Tianqing swung his sword again and chopped the godhead into pieces. Just like that, one high divine lord after another was killed by Ji Tianqing. When a few high divine lords died one after another and the 3 elders Pexing were also killed, only the 4 directions divine general, Liang Jianqing, Yi Liangan, and Lian Er were left. The crowd finally could not hold on any longer. Lian Er and Liang Jianqing looked at each other and used all their strength to self-destruct. Chapter 3169. The Lian Er and Liang Jianqing had been forced into a corner and could only self-detonate. Other than that, they could not think of any other way to hurt Ji Tianqing. The two of them lit up with dazzling divine light as their divine bodies shook violently, emitting a dangerous aura that could destroy heaven and earth. Yi Liangan and the 4 directions divine generals were shocked to see this, and their expressions became extremely complicated. They instinctively wanted to retreat and persuade the Lian Er and Liang Jianqing. However, they were well aware of the situation. Self-detonation would kill them, but not self-detonation would still kill them. Since they were going to die either way, they might as well self-detonate. They might even be able to hurt Ji Tianqing and destroy this damned sword formation. Thus, the 4 directions divine generals and Yi Liang, and also made up their minds and self-detonated at the same time. When they ignited their godheads, blood flames soared from their bodies, and their bodies shook violently, emitting an incomparably violent aura. Everyone was in great pain and they were filled with anger and hatred. They glared at Ji Tianqing and let out angry roars. Bastard! You forced us to do this. Brat, let's welcome death together. Even if we die, we'll drag you down with us. Let's go to hell together, huh? It looked like the 7 high-level divine lords were about to self-detonate. When that happened, the entire heaven-vanquishing sword formation would be destroyed, and everything within 100,000 miles would be razed to the ground. At this critical juncture, Ji Tianqing made a choice that left everyone dumbfounded. He unleashed his strongest power and used the heaven-capturing dragon claw to grab the Lian heir. Swoosh! The golden dragon claw instantly grabbed the swollen Lian heir and pulled him in front of Ji Tianqing. What was even more incredible was that Ji Tianqing's unparalleled divine power actually sealed the Lian heir. He forcibly suppressed the Lian heir's self-detonation. Then he used his divine consciousness to control the heaven-vanquishing sword formation and deactivated it. Shwa! With a flash of light, the 25,000 sword lights of the heaven-destroying sword formation, which had covered 1,000 miles, disappeared without a trace. That was not all. Ji Tianqing swung the sword of burial of heaven and used an ultimate technique. Rising Dragon Slash. He brazenly swung his sword and slashed out a golden dragon shadow between him, the four directions godly generals, Liang Jianqing and Yi Liang'an. The 100-mile-long sword light that looked like a golden dragon tore through the night sky and split the area into two. A huge spatial crack appeared between the two. The two of them were clearly 200 miles apart, but they were in different spaces. Liang Jianqing, Yi Liang'an, and the four directions divine generals were all dumbfounded. They simply couldn't believe that Ji Tianqing was actually able to slash through the night sky and create a huge spatial rift. It can even cut through space. Just how powerful is he? Only a godly king expert can cut through the void. Looks like we were right. He is really a godly king expert. No wonder. We didn't lose for nothing. The six Sir Gods exclaimed and exclaimed. They had mixed feelings. However, they didn't have time to think. In the next moment they suddenly exploded, turning into 6 balls of dazzling light that were like the scorching sun, blooming with the most dazzling colors in the night sky. That was the most dazzling moment in their lives. It was also the last moment. Boom. Boom boom boom. 6 consecutive earth-shattering explosions were heard. It was like a super loud sound that reverberated in the sky. Boundless divine flames and light spread out in all directions, engulfing everything in its path. The ground within a 100-mile-long crater was blasted into the ground and dust was stirred up. However, the shockwave that was aimed at Ji Tianqing was blocked by the spatial crack after it spread for 100 miles. The destructive shockwave rushed out of the spatial crack and into the vast void. Of course, the spatial crack was only 100 miles wide. It was like a 100-mile-long chasm. Even more 5-colored shockwaves swept across from other places, illuminating the night sky as bright as day. A 100-mile-long crater was blasted into the ground. Ji Tianqing stood next to the spatial crack. The area within a 100-mile-long radius around him was calm and very safe. The Lian heir's self-detonation was suppressed. His godhead was heavily damaged and more than half of his body was burned. He was on the verge of death. However, he was still conscious. He witnessed this scene with his own eyes and was extremely shocked. It was so shocking that he almost lost his ability to think. His mind was blank. There was only one word left. It's over. The 13,000-strong army was completely annihilated. He was the only survivor, but he had fallen into Ji Tianqing's hands. His life was no longer in his own hands. He wasn't worried about his own safety. After all, he would die in the end. What he was more worried about was that the self-detonation of so many Sir Gods would destroy everything within a 100-mile-long radius. And Raging Flame Royal City was 150,000 miles to the south. If the shockwave swept through Raging Flame Royal City, the consequences would be unimaginable. The destructive shockwaves spread until they were 100,000 miles away before their power gradually weakened. When they were 150,000 miles away, the 5-colored shockwaves gradually dissipated. From the explosion point to the north, there were mountains and valleys for hundreds of thousands of miles. Now they had all been razed to the ground and turned into ruins. And to the south, there were flat grasslands all the way to the outside of Raging Flame Royal City. There was no doubt that the hundreds of thousands of miles of plains had also been flattened, and the earth had been shaved off nearly 100,000 feet. The destructive shockwaves spread all the way to the outside of Raging Flame Royal City and gradually dissipated when they were about to reach the city walls. The Great City Protection Array in the north of Raging Flame Royal City was affected by the shockwaves and automatically activated. In the brightly lit Royal City, countless people saw the divine light that covered the sky and the earth, the power that could destroy the world. Countless people were frightened. They screamed and shouted in horror, and some even prepared to run away. For a moment, the originally quiet raging flame royal city became lively. Countless people walked out of their homes and onto the streets, looking up at the night sky in the north and discussing spiritedly. The ordinary people didn't know what was going on. That boundless divine light didn't seem to be the result of a great battle between experts. After all, no one could release such a terrifying divine light. Therefore, many people guessed that it was some kind of anomaly or some kind of omen. And in the royal palace of Raging Flame Royal City, when the king of Raging Flame heard the news, his face darkened on the spot, and his eyes flashed with deep hatred and disappointment. He was well aware that it wasn't some kind of anomaly, but the self-destruction of a divine lord. Moreover, the self-destruction of a divine lord couldn't have such great power. It must have been caused by the self-destruction of many divine lords at the same time. The answer was obvious. He had already guessed that Yi Liang and the Four Directions divine generals, and the experts of the royal palace wouldn't be able to come back. Moreover, the shockwaves of the self-destruction had spread for hundreds of thousands of miles, and the 13,000 troops would definitely have died. However, after the grief and anger, there was only one question left in his mind. The power of the self-destruction was so terrifying. That bastard Tianxing should be dead, right? If they died together, the sacrifice of the 13,000 troops would be worth it. Chapter 3170. Outside the palace. Inside the resplendent palace. This time Prince Lian wasn't in the secret chamber. He was standing on the roof of the palace, silently gazing at the northern night sky. The cold wind whistled, blowing his long hair and gold-threaded black robe back and forth. Two attendants dressed in black stood quietly behind him. Even though the overwhelming divine power shockwave had dissipated a long time ago, Prince Lian still stood on the roof of the palace. But Prince Lian stood motionless on the roof and continued to stare at the northern night sky without saying a word. King City was bustling with noise and excitement. Everywhere was brightly lit and people were moving about. Prince Lian wasn't affected at all. He muttered to himself, Lian Heir Liang Jianqing and the 13,000 people have completed their mission. The battle is over. They still lost. Prince Lian's voice was low, cold and solemn, with a hint of exhaustion and self-mockery. But he was strangely calm. He didn't get angry or curse. Perhaps he had already predicted the outcome of tonight's battle. Or maybe he had been defeated by Ji Tianxing for so long that he was numb to it. The two attendants behind him hurriedly comforted Prince Lian. Don't worry, Your Highness. The destructive shock wave must have been caused by the self-destruction of many divine lords. Although second brother and sect leader Liang have sacrificed themselves, their sacrifice was worth it. But their sacrifice was worth it. That D*Emin beast Tianxing must have been killed by the explosion. Your Highness, I've already sent a spy to Celestial Dragon Mountain to investigate. Please wait for a moment. We'll have the results and news soon. The status and position of these two attendants were both lower than Lian Heir. But they were also Prince Lian's confidants. His personal guards were named Lian San and Lian Si respectively. Prince Lian shook his head and said calmly, No need to wait. I've already guessed the result. If Lian Heir and Liang Jianqing could really kill Tianxing, why would they self-destruct? Besides, I know Tianxing's strength and prowess better than anyone else. Even if he withstood the shockwave of the explosion, he would at most be slightly injured. He definitely won't die. Lian San and Lian Si looked at each other, both showing worry and anxiety. But when they saw Prince Lian so pessimistic and depressed, they didn't know how to console him. At this time, Grand Prince Lian looked up at the night sky again and said in a sorrowful tone, The 9 great sects are gone, and the elites of the He-Tian sect branch are all dead. Even the imperial army under Chang Yi's command suffered heavy casualties, their strength greatly reduced. This king spent 20 years to develop this situation and secretly control this divine kingdom. But now there is nothing left. Tianxing, he really is this king's old enemy. Grand Prince Lian closed his eyes and heaved a long sigh. His tone was filled with hatred and unwillingness. Both Lian San and Lian Si could see that Prince Lian was extremely sad and indignant, but he had no choice but to suppress his emotions and try his best to remain calm. If he kept it bottled up in his heart and couldn't find an outlet, it would be easy for problems to arise. Thus, the two of them hurriedly advised, Your Highness, the night wind is cold here. You should return to the hall to wait and rest. Your Highness, we've only suffered a temporary setback. When you recover, that brat will definitely be executed. As they spoke, the two of them supported Prince Lian on his left and right and were about to return to the hall to rest. However, Prince Lian shook them off and sneered with anger. This king's injuries have mostly recovered. Do I still need you to support me? Am I that weak? The two of them hurriedly bowed and apologized. Prince Lian didn't pursue the matter and said expressionlessly, "No need to rest. Go pack up and gather all the attendants. We should leave." "No. Leave this palace?" Xianxia was startled, his face full of surprise. Lian-san thought for a moment and nodded in agreement. The defensive power of this palace is much weaker than before. It's weakened by several times. Now that all the forces under your Highness's command have been destroyed, we have no one to use. Only within the palace, there are still a large number of experts protecting it. Only then will your Highness be safe. Xianxia finally understood and hurriedly agreed. That's right. Then I'll go gather the attendants now. Seeing that the two of them had misunderstood, Prince Lian frowned and said in a deep voice, "You two idiots. When did I say we're going to the palace? With the few men under Chang'e, if Tianqing really wants to kill his way into the capital, can they stop him? I'm asking you to gather the attendants and pack up. We're leaving the capital." In his anger, Prince Lian spoke more bluntly. The meaning of these words was that they were going to pack up and run away. Lian-san and Xianxia were surprised and puzzled. They muttered in their hearts, "It can't be like this, right? Is it really that serious?" After hesitating for a moment, Lian-san asked tentatively, "Your Highness, where should we go after we leave the Raging Flame capital? Don't tell me you're going back to the capital?" Prince Lian turned to glare at him and scolded, "Why would I go back to the capital? To let those bastards see me as a joke? I'm going to the heavenly sect. My injuries haven't healed, so I need to recuperate in seclusion." The heavenly sect he was talking about was the headquarters of the Great Yan Empire. As for injuries haven't healed and need to recuperate, it was an excuse. His injuries were clearly 80% healed. Lian-san and Xianxia completely understood Prince Lian's meaning. They did not say anything else and hurriedly carried out the order. Chapter 3171. The Lian heir was very loyal to Prince Lian and he was unyielding. No matter how Ji Tianqing interrogated him, he kept his mouth shut and didn't reveal a single word. When Ji Tianqing saw this, he wasted no more time and killed the Lian heir. Then he took out the Lian heir's godhead and circulated his energy to refine it, stripping the memories from his soul. This method was simple and crude, but it had its drawbacks as well. Directly refining the memories from the godhead was often incomplete. There would be many omissions. Moreover, the Lian heir was already heavily injured. He had even ignited his godhead and self-detonated. Although his self-detonation had been suppressed by Ji Tianqing, his godhead was still damaged. Not only was his primal qi greatly damaged, but his strength had also plummeted. Even his memories were incomplete and damaged. Even if Ji Tianqing refined his godhead, he didn't know how much of his soul memories he could obtain. Under such circumstances, whether he could obtain key secrets and information would depend on his luck. A black pagoda hovered in a cave in the belly of a mountain. Ji Tianqing entered the divine pagoda and circulated his energy to refine the godhead in the distorted spacetime. Only 2 hours had passed in the outside world, but he had spent 4 days in the distorted spacetime. These 4 days were enough for him to refine the Lian heir's godhead and strip the memories from his soul. Ji Tianqing was pleasantly surprised by the results. At the same time, he felt slightly depressed and regretful. This was because Ji Tianqing had obtained many of Prince Lian's secrets from the Lian heir's memories. This included Prince Lian's background, experience, inner thoughts and goals, as well as what he had done over the years. He was very clear about it all. Ji Tianqing even knew the thoughts of the Great Yan Emperor and the Great Yan Prince, as well as many secrets of the Great Yan Empire. What interested him the most was that there was a very important thing in Lian heir's memory. 9 years ago, a faction in the Great Yan Empire discovered a mystic realm within the empire's borders. Those experts accidentally entered the secret realm and discovered a divine palace. It seemed to be the cave dwelling of a god king expert. The experts were so excited that they rushed into the cavern with hearts full of excitement. They had thought that it would be a great opportunity. They would be able to obtain a king-grade divine artifact and the inheritance of a god king. But they did not expect that what awaited them was danger and death. They had triggered a king-grade divine formation outside the cave, and 3 of them had been killed on the spot. Only 2 of them survived and they fled the secret realm in a panic. After the news spread, many top forces swarmed over, trying all kinds of ways to break the cave mansion's formation. Not far away he saw endless ruins and deep pits. It was caused by the self-detonation of several high-level divine lords. Even now dust was still flying everywhere and smoke and dust filled the air. Ji Tianxing probed with his divine sense and saw a large number of armored and black-clothed experts searching around the ruins. He didn't even need to think to know that those people must be Prince Lian and the King of Raging Flames men. His decisive battle with an army of 13,000 had caused such a huge commotion that the entire Raging Flame royal city was alarmed. It would be strange if the King of Raging Flame and Prince Lian did not send someone to check on the situation. Ji Tianxing increased his speed. Like a stream of light cutting through the night sky, he headed straight for the Raging Flame royal city. While hurrying, he was still thinking in his heart, I hope Prince Lian still has some hope in his heart and did not leave the royal city. As long as he is still in the royal city, tonight will be the day of his death. It was already early in the morning and there were still 4 hours before daybreak. To Ji Tianxing, time was enough. As long as Prince Lian was still in the royal city, he would definitely die before daybreak. Unknowingly 2 hours passed. Ji Tianxing flew for 180,000 miles and arrived outside the Raging Flame royal city. Under the pitch-black curtain of night, the Raging Flame royal city sat quietly on the grassland. This majestic city that had existed for 10,000 years was neatly built. It occupied an area of 500 miles and could accommodate millions of people. The main city walls around the city were made of black stone that was hundreds of meters tall. While it was solemn and dignified, its defensive power was also very strong. Although the city walls had been repaired several times in the past 10,000 years. However, the most recent renovation was 1,000 years ago. The strip-shaped boulders that built the city walls were covered with moss, as well as cracks and marks etched by wind and frost. In each of the 4 directions of the royal city, there was a huge city gate that was 800 meters tall. It could allow 12 carriages to enter and exit at the same time. It was incomparably spacious. It was late at night and the north gate was tightly shut. There were hundreds of city guards stationed under the gate, all of them armed with swords and sabers, waiting in formation. If it was in the past, the royal city would have been quiet and peaceful by now, and the lights would have been much sparser. But tonight the entire royal city was brightly lit, and hundreds of thousands of people were still moving around outside. Countless god race members gathered together in the streets and alleys, whispering to each other. Even the number of city guards patrolling had increased several times. There were also many mysterious black-clothed people coming and going in and out of the royal city, seeming to be in a hurry. An iron-blooded and solemn atmosphere shrouded the entire royal city, and it also made the people somewhat worried. Many people were guessing whether a great enemy had come to invade. Was the royal city about to be attacked? Ji Tianxing stood outside the north gate, hiding in the clouds, looking down at the royal city of Raging Flame, quietly observing. The 4 great city defense arrays protecting the royal city had been activated, covering the north, south, east and west respectively. No matter where Ji Tianxing sneaked into the royal city, he had to break one of the great city defense arrays. Otherwise he could only go through the 4 city gates and be interrogated by the city guards. Or he could directly force his way through the city gates and kill everyone in his way. In that case he would alert the King of Raging Flame and Prince Lian before he could get close to the palace. After thinking about it, Ji Tianxing still decided to quietly break the great city defense arrays. The north gate was heavily guarded. Not only were there many city guards patrolling, but there was also a large number of imperial guards lying in ambush. Furthermore, there were more than a dozen divine lords hiding in many houses and buildings not far from the city gate. This was obviously to prevent Ji Tianxing from coming from the north and forcing his way through the north gate. In order not to alert the enemy, Ji Tianxing quietly went to the south gate. He had already used the Divine Eye secret technique to observe and could clearly see the defensive power of the 4 city gates. In comparison, the south gate seemed to be heavily guarded on the surface, with a large number of city guards and imperial guards. But in reality the south gate's defensive power was the weakest. Choosing to sneak into the royal city from there was, of course, the safest choice. Ji Tianxing flew to the south side of the city wall and quietly burrowed into the ground. After moving 100 feet underground, he was blocked by the 5-colored light shield. So he used the Divine Eye secret technique to carefully observe the Great City Defense Array. This array had a radius of 100 miles, and it was a Supreme Monarch-level Divine Array. Its structure was quite complicated and its defensive power was also very strong. Ji Tianxing could guess that it was most likely set up by many high-level divine lords. Also, it had to be strengthened and reinforced for many years to have such power. However, to Ji Tianxing this was not a difficult task. Soon a great battle broke out underground. More than 300 city guards unleashed all kinds of divine powers and ultimate skills, unleashing a torrent of divine light that blotted out the sky and covered the earth, blasting toward Ji Tianxing. The soil and rocks below the ground had been blown to smithereens by the divine light and shadow, revealing enormous faults and loopholes. In the face of this sudden situation, Ji Tianxing was not worried. He was just a little surprised. There's actually a high divine lord disguised as an ordinary city guard and waited for me at the southern city gate. He didn't know if it was Prince Lian's arrangement or the King of Raging Flames' decree. If this was arranged by the ruler of the Kingdom of Raging Flames, then he was a schemer who could not be underestimated. After all, this person had already guessed this lord's thoughts and actually knew how to do the opposite. With this thought in mind, Ji Tianxing waved his hands and decisively unleashed a sky full of sword glows to resist the siege of the city guards. Bam, 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 boom, boom, boom. With a deafening explosion, the sky full of sword glows clashed with the divine light and shadow, creating a terrifying shockwave. More than 100 city guards were killed on the spot by the shockwave, turning into a bloody mist and dregs. There were still more than 200 sword glows that had not shattered. They were still as sharp as ever as they charged toward the 100 or so survivors. The shockwave spread out and caused the ground to collapse for dozens of miles. The entire royal city shook violently as if a great earthquake had occurred. Even the city walls near the southern city gate had caved in a little. As a result, more than half of the royal city was alarmed. Those commoners who were still on the streets discussing the shockwave of the self-detonation instantly paled and let out worried cries. Heavens, we were right. There is indeed a strong enemy invading the royal city and they are already fighting. I felt it just now. The shockwave came from underground. The strong enemy had sneaked into the royal city from underground. If the strong enemy had sneaked into the royal city silently, that would be the most dangerous. Luckily, the city guards and the imperial guards were more responsible and managed to find the enemy. The shockwave came from near the southern city gate. Everyone stay as far away as possible to avoid being implicated. All kinds of exclamations and discussions exploded in the royal city and gathered into a torrent of sound waves. But very quickly, the dull sound waves were drowned out by the loud explosion coming from underground. It turned out that it was the 7th-degree realm Sir God who had launched an all-out attack on Ji Tianxing. The two of them exchanged a blow, but Ji Tianxing was not injured at all and did not yield an inch. As for the middle-aged man, he was sent flying backward while vomiting blood. Both of his legs had been minced by the sword glows. Suffering such a heavy injury, the middle-aged man fell into the ruins and gave out a heart-wrenching scream. The 100 over city guards who were lucky enough to survive instantly revealed a horrified expression when they saw their second commander was not able to take one blow from the other party and was seriously injured. But it was too late for them to escape. Hundreds of dazzling golden sword glows, carrying a shapeless sword intent which could kill everything, enveloped everyone. Following the explosion of bam bam bam, those 100 over city guards were turned into dregs by the sword glows. Only that middle-aged man was left alive as he struggled to climb out of the ruins. He wanted to continue fighting, but he happened to see Ji Tianxing killing 100 over city guards in seconds. Seeing this scene, the middle-aged man was horrified. He knew that he wasn't Ji Tianxing's match, so he tried his best to escape. As he escaped into the royal city, he didn't forget to send out a signal for help and a warning. Ji Tianxing's plan had been spoiled and he hated that middle-aged man very much. His face was gloomy as he chased after him with murderous eyes. In just 2 short breaths he caught up with the middle-aged man and released 3 extremely violent sword glows, turning him into dregs. Even the middle-aged man's godhead was blasted into pieces. The power of the 3 dazzling golden swords did not diminish. They traversed dozens of miles and gradually dissipated into the depths of the ground. Ji Tianxing put away the godhead fragments, entered stealth mode and left the underground. Zhoosh. With a flash of light he avoided the city guards near the city gate and appeared in a house in the South City district. At the same time his divine sense enveloped the entire royal city and saw everything in the royal city clearly. All the people in the city ran in panic and hid in their own residences. And within the royal palace, a large number of city guards and palace experts rushed out and rushed over at an extremely fast speed. Even the Sir God experts guarding the other 3 city gates quickly rushed over to provide support. Ji Tianxing was quite surprised by the speed of the other party's reaction. However, he maintained stealth mode and concealed his aura, successfully hiding from everyone's detection. He swaggered out of the house and flew across the night sky at a moderate speed towards the brightly lit royal palace. Chapter 3174. As Ji Tianxing flew toward the palace, many imperial guards and experts rushed toward him from all directions. There were at least 30 groups and more than 1,000 people. They all looked hurried and murderous. However, these people brushed past Ji Tianxing and did not notice him. When they arrived near the south gate, they naturally did not find him. They hurriedly searched around. At this time, Ji Tianxing had arrived at the side of the palace. The palace was located in the middle of the city. It covered an area of 50 square miles and was like a small city. The palace walls, which were hundreds of feet high, were lined with imperial guards in armor and holding swords. They were ready for battle. Within the palace walls, there were hundreds of splendid palaces and buildings, all of which were lit up with dazzling lights. Shadows of people could be seen everywhere. Tonight, the palace were destined to be chaotic. Not only were the imperial guards on high alert, but even the attendants and servants in the palace were also in a defensive posture. Obviously, the King of Raging Flame had already given the order and reminded the people in the palace. He had already guessed that Ji Tianxing would sneak into the palace to take revenge. Therefore, the entire palace was in a state of nervousness. What gave Ji Tianxing a headache was that the palace also had 2 layers of defensive divine arrays, and they were fully activated. The 2 defensive divine arrays were not big. They only covered an area of 50 square miles, which was just enough to cover the entire palace. The defensive divine array of the palace was also of supreme monarch level. However, compared to the 4 defensive divine arrays, it was more sophisticated and complex. Its defensive power was also more powerful. Ji Tianxing hid in the dark and used the secret technique of God's Eye to observe for half an hour before he found a flaw. It took him another hour to break through the 2 defensive divine formations one after the other. He passed through the hole in the colorful light shield and successfully sneaked into the palace. However, just as he appeared outside a majestic palace, a bright divine light shone above his head. More than a dozen divine light shadows bombarded him. At the same time, a few deep and majestic roars sounded in the night sky. The thief is here. Come and surround him. Found him. He's here. Come and help. Quick, surround him. We can't let him escape. Very clearly, when Ji Tianxing was cracking the defensive divine array, he was discovered by a divine lord powerhouse. In the night sky 10,000 feet in front of him, there were 3 high divine lords. They were all imperial consecrators under the monarch's command. Other than the 3 of them, there were more than a dozen consecrators in the palace. Normally, these consecrators lived like princes and cultivated in seclusion, not showing themselves easily. Now that it was a critical moment, all the consecrators had been awakened to protect the safety of the palace. Each of them led a group of elite imperial guards to guard every direction of the palace. Coincidentally, the 3 inner palace consecrators were nearby and discovered Ji Tianxing, who was breaking the divine formation. The 3 of them attacked without any hesitation. At the same time, they called for reinforcements from the inner palace and the imperial army. Soon, dozens of saber lights and sword shadows arrived in front of Ji Tianxing and engulfed his figure. Ji Tianxing wasn't worried at all. He swung the sword of burial of heaven in his right hand, sending out 9 dazzling sword lights. Bang! Bang bang bang! The sacred giant sword clashed with the saber lights and sword shadows, creating a deafening sound. In a blink, the divine powers of the 3 inner palace consecrators were shattered by the sword lights. Not only that, the 9 giant swords didn't lose their power. They attacked the 3 consecrators separately. The 3 consecrators were shocked. Their expressions changed immediately. They hurriedly performed their ultimate skills to block the attack with all their strength. After another series of muffled sounds, the 3 inner palace consecrators were knocked back and fell into 2 palaces with blood spurting out of their mouths. The defensive divine formations of the 2 palaces were also smashed until divine light flashed chaotically and cracks appeared on them. Xianxia wanted to take advantage of the situation and quickly kill the 3 injured inner palace consecrators. However, another 4 consecrators and more than 1,000 imperial army hurried to the scene. Everyone's gazes and divine senses locked onto Xianxia and attacked him without hesitation. Suddenly, deafening battle cries burst out, and the dazzling light of divine spells lit up, and the area became chaotic. Xianxia was besieged and had to give up on killing the 3 inner palace consecrators. He turned to fend off the 1,000 imperial army. Infinite sky of chaos. In order to save time and divine power, he used his divine powers and his body became transparent. All of a sudden, the overwhelming saber light and sword shadows pierced through his body and scattered on the ground. Most of the divine powers dissipated and their power was absorbed by the world. A small portion of the divine art light shadows blasted into a palace with a radius of 100 feet, instantly turning it into ruins. Xianxia was unharmed and took the opportunity to wave the burial of heaven. Sword light filled the sky. Sword of the breaking sun. God-killing sword. Sword light poured down from the sky and drowned the 4 inner palace consecrators and more than 1,000 imperial army soldiers. Suddenly, blood and flesh splattered under the sword light. Screams rose and fell. The elite imperial army soldiers could not withstand a single blow from the sword light. They were as fragile as paper. After a burst of violent sword light flashed, more than 800 imperial guards were killed and turned into blood mist and dregs. Even the 4 inner palace consecrators were seriously injured by the god-killing sword. Some of them lost limbs and some were even cut in half at the waist. Such a shocking scene caused a few of the inner palace consecrators and the surviving imperial guards to reveal expressions of fear and let out terrified cries. The 3 consecrators who were seriously injured wanted to help. Seeing this scene, the 3 of them stopped their charge and pretended to be physically exhausted as they retreated to the side. They hurriedly circulated their qi to suppress their injuries. Seeing that the surroundings had fallen into silence, the situation was a little awkward. More than 800 imperial army soldiers and 7 inner palace consecrators did not dare to attack. Fortunately, 2 more inner palace consecrators and a commander of the imperial army arrived with more than 1,000 imperial army soldiers. This group of people came aggressively with murderous intent. They roared and charged, releasing divine light that covered the sky and drowning Xianxia. Seeing this, the 800 imperial army soldiers and 7 consecrators were slightly relieved. They quickly surrounded and attacked. Since they had more people, they should have a chance to kill him. Taking a step back, even if they could not kill him, they should be safe. However, they soon realized that they were wrong. They had underestimated Xianxia's terrifying strength. Sword come. Xianxia saw that more and more people were coming, so he used his ultimate killing move. Since he had already snuck into the palace and exposed himself, he had no qualms about killing. He pointed his right hand at the sky and gathered the power of the stars to form 25,000 divine giant swords. They poured down like a meteor shower. In an instant, the dazzling meteor shower enveloped the entire imperial city. The night sky within a 10,000-mile radius was as bright as day. Countless divine giant swords poured down, focusing on the palace within a 50,000-mile radius. As a result, the divine giant swords in this area were as dense as raindrops. Chapter 3175. Boom, boom, boom. There was a series of loud noises. The entire palace was engulfed by the huge divine swords. It was a colorful scene. More than 1,000 imperial guards, 9 imperial consecrators, and 1 imperial guard commander who had besieged Xianxia were killed on the spot. With Xianxia as the center, the area within a radius of 10,000 feet was a deep pit. All the houses and buildings were reduced to dust and everyone was blasted into pieces. In just an instant, more than 3,000 people died within the area of 30,000 meters. The other 1,000 people were the royal family members, servants and guards from the various palaces and residences. Of course, the Heaven Punishment Sword formation covered the entire palace and the number of casualties was much more than that. The 4 city protection arrays and the 2 defense divine arrays of the palace only lasted for about 10 breaths under the attack of the 10,000 swords before they were smashed into pieces. When the defense array collapsed, the entire palace was exposed to the sword formation and was at the mercy of the sword formation. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing deliberately controlled the target of the 10,000 swords. There were 10,000 huge swords around the palace to form a sword net to seal off the area within a radius of 1,000 miles. The other 15,000 giant swords were basically gathered above the palace. Therefore, there were no casualties among the commoners and deities in the palace. On the other hand, the situation in the palace was too horrible to look at. In just 20 breaths, more than 5,000 imperial guards, more than 10,000 royal family members, servants and guards were killed by the 10,000 swords. Nearly 80% of the palaces and residences were destroyed by the sword radiance. Not even the broken walls were left. Under the attack of the 10,000 swords, not to mention the enlightened masters, even the lower and middle Sir gods could not hold on for long before they were killed. As a result, the palace was completely destroyed. 80% of the buildings were destroyed. There were only 20 or so palaces full of cracks that were on the verge of collapse. There were more than 50,000 people in the palace, including 20,000 imperial guards, 20,000 servants and guards. The remaining 10,000 people were the royal family members, imperial consecrators and deity nation officials. However, after the heaven punishment sword formation operated for 30 breaths, more than 80% of the people in the palace were killed. Only about 10,000 people were still alive. However, most of them were seriously injured and covered in blood. Of course, those who could survive were basically experts, powerhouses or people of noble status who were protected by many powerhouses. The 40,000 people who were killed were basically the imperial guards, servants and guards. There were also some members of the royal family. Ji Tianxing didn't do anything. He just stood in the night sky and stared expressionlessly at the majestic temple in the middle of the palace. Secretly, he controlled the operation of the heaven-destroying sword formation and controlled the target of the 10,000 swords. That magnificent temple was the main hall of the royal palace, the most solemn and dignified place. Usually, the ruler of the raging flame country stayed there for a long period of time, discussing court matters with the civil and military officials. He was also in that temple. After the sword formation operated for 40 breaths, 95% of the buildings had disappeared, turning into dust and debris. The temple's defense had also completely collapsed. It was smashed into pieces by the tens of thousands of swords and collapsed into ruins. Only then did a few balls of dazzling divine light fly out from the ruins. Shwa. Shwa. A total of 9 balls of divine light enveloped more than 3,000 members of the divine clan and flew into the night sky. The 9 balls of divine light were unusually strong. Some of them were formed by many defensive artifacts, while others were formed by many powerhouses working together to form a shield. The 3,000 members of the divine clan within the light shield were basically members of the royal family, important officials and experts of the palace. Under the control of many powerhouses, the 9 balls of divine light flew through the rain of swords and toward Ji Tianxing. While they were still tens of thousands of feet away, a middle-aged man's angry roar came from the golden ball of divine light at the forefront. Tianxing, stop. The middle-aged man's voice was heavy and majestic, with a tinge of desolation, anxiety and anger. Ji Tianxing ignored him and continued to operate the heaven-destroying sword formation expressionlessly. He continued to kill the rest of the people in the palace. After a few breaths, the 9 balls of divine light were even closer to him and stopped 10,000 feet away. At this time, the heaven-destroying sword formation had killed thousands of imperial guards, royal family members, servants and guards. At this point, more than 50,000 people in the palace were almost all dead. Those who were still alive were only the 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light. Of course, Ji Tianxing also understood that those 3,000 people were the most respected and powerful people in the palace. Given another 10 breaths of time, he could operate the heaven-destroying sword formation to destroy the 9 balls of divine light and kill all 3,000 people. However, the middle-aged man's angry voice came from the golden ball of divine light at the forefront again. Tianxing, you have already won. I admit defeat. Why do you have to kill all of us? There was no doubt that the middle-aged man wearing a golden dragon robe and a luxurious crown was the king of the country of furious flames, Xianxia. He was tall, had long arms, a square face and a broad forehead. He had the appearance of a king with thick eyebrows and big eyes. However, at this moment he did not have any of his former majesty and loftiness. His brows were tightly knitted and his expression was sorrowful. His eyes were dim. He had no choice. The palace that had been passed down for tens of thousands of years was destroyed in his generation. The royal family had lasted for tens of thousands of years and had given birth to thousands of bloodline descendants. Now more than half of them were dead. After suffering such a heavy blow, if he could still remain calm, he would not have been subdued by Prince Lian. Zhou Xian used his divine thoughts to control the heaven-destroying sword formation and temporarily stopped the attack. Suddenly 15,000 giant swords floated in the night sky. The tips of the swords were pointed at the 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light. The formless sword intent suppressed everything and was incomparably violent. The pressure on the 3,000 people increased sharply. Their faces were pale and their hearts were filled with fear. Zhou Xian looked at Xianxia expressionlessly. After sizing him up, he said, "You are the king of the country of raging flames?" Xianxia nodded and said in a heavy tone, "That's right, I am." Zhou Xian said again, "I think you know why I am here." Xianxia was very tactful. He nodded again and said, "Of course I know. You are here for Prince Lian and me." Zhou Xian frowned and was about to correct him. Xianxia sighed and bowed deeply. He said in a sincere tone, "Young Master Xianxia, I have heard of your reputation and deeds not long after you stepped into the kingdom of raging flames. Your strength is strong and your methods are ruthless. This monarch has never seen anyone like you before. Tonight's battle on Heavenly Dragon Mountain reached the peak and created a miracle. After tonight your name will spread throughout the great Yan Empire and shock the world. Now that things have come to this, I have already suffered a crushing defeat. I don't want to say anything more. I only ask that young Master Xianxia be magnanimous and let these 3,000 people and the millions of people in the royal city go. No matter what, it's all my fault. I hope you don't implicate the innocent. You are the soaring dragon of the 9 heavens, the divine king's choice. You should have the bearing of a peerless powerhouse. You should not make things difficult for them. To show my sincerity, I am willing to commit suicide on the spot. I hope that young Master Xianxia can fulfill my wish." Chapter 3176. Xianxia and Prince Lian had completely different styles of doing things. He wasn't as cunning and scheming as Prince Lian. In comparison, he was more honest, steady, and a man of his word. Of course, this was the basic quality of a monarch. But overall, Xianxia was much more honest and straightforward. After speaking, he formed a seal with both hands and began to accumulate divine power into the Godhead in his mind. As long as Zhou Xian agreed and allowed him to commit suicide on the spot, sparing more than 3,000 royal family members and millions of citizens, he would shatter the Godhead without hesitation. Seeing this, Zhou Xian raised an eyebrow and asked, "How did a man of your temperament become Prince Lian's fan?" Xianxia was startled, then calmly said, "I know you have a blood feud with the young prince, so you must be prejudiced against him. Perhaps in your eyes, the young prince is a scheming, sinister, and ruthless person. But to me, the young prince is my benefactor. Even if I repay him with my life, it won't be enough. If it weren't for little prince's help back then with this monarch's shrewdness and conduct, how could this monarch have survived the struggle for the throne? How could I have become the monarch of divine nation? Back then the young prince saved my life and helped me ascend to the throne. Now even if I die, I can't repay his kindness." Zhou Xian had heard about the matter between Xianxia and Prince Lian from Ye Feiyun. He also learned about 70 to 80% of it from Lian Heir's soul memories. He didn't want to hear more from Xianxia, so he said in a low voice, "Xianxia, there's no enmity between us. It's only because you work for Prince Lian that I have to deal with you. But now I'll give you a chance. You don't have to commit suicide. As long as you hand over Prince Lian or tell me where he's hiding, I'll let you go. The members of the royal family around you, as well as the millions of civilians in the royal city, will be spared from death." The 3,000 people in the 9 balls of divine light immediately revealed expressions of joy, anticipation, and excitement. Their despairing hearts were also illuminated by the light of dawn. Everyone looked at Xianxia, full of hope that he would agree. However, Xianxia's body shook, and his expression became rather unsightly. Especially when he saw the eyes of the people around him become bright and passionate, his expression became even more gloomy. "No. Xue Changyi's tone was firm as he coldly shouted and righteously said, Ben Jun just said that even if I die, it will be difficult to repay little prince's kindness. How can I betray him? Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and sneered, You refuse a toast only to be forced to drink a forfeit. This is not integrity, this is blind loyalty. Since you are not willing to betray Grand Prince Lian, then I will kill you and everyone else and then destroy the entire royal city. After he finished speaking, he used his divine telekinesis to control the heaven-destroying sword formation and sped it up. The 15,000 giant swords floating above everyone's heads shone with a brilliant brilliance, releasing an incomparably violent sword intent that would pour down at any moment. The 3,000 people in the 9 clusters of godly light were in a life-and-death situation. Their faces were pale and their hearts were filled with fear and despair. Many people couldn't bear the enormous pressure and were also afraid of the threat of death. They all opened their mouths to beg for mercy and persuade Xue Changyi. Your Majesty, please reconsider. Your Majesty, now is not the time to let your emotions affect your decisions. Your Majesty, please think about the royal family and the officials. If everyone dies here, the God Nation's foundation will be destroyed. Your Majesty, even if you don't care about our lives, please spare everyone's lives for the sake of the millions of people in Royal City. Those millions of innocent people were innocent. How can you be so stubborn and cause everyone's deaths? Instantly, many officials of the God Nation began to persuade the king. Some of the royal family members with higher statuses even spoke harshly and reprimanded the king for being insensitive. Xue Changyi's situation became extremely awkward. He had become the enemy of many royal family members and officials. Everyone blamed him for the deaths of their own people and the deaths of millions of people. This was human nature. Xue Changyi wanted to be loyal and righteous, but everyone only wanted to live. Who would be willing to let their emotions affect their decisions? Ji Tianxing made it clear that as long as Xue Changyi revealed Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts, he would spare everyone's lives. But Xue Changyi didn't agree. He would rather die than betray Grand Prince Lian. No one blamed Ji Tianxing. They could only blame Xue Changyi for being cold-blooded and heartless. Everyone became agitated and gradually turned from persuasion to crying, reprimanding, and begging. It was as if Xue Changyi wanted to kill everyone, including the millions of people in Royal City. Xue Changyi was so angry that his whole body trembled. His face was as black as the bottom of a pot. His qi and blood surged and he spat out a mouthful of old blood. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said, I admire your integrity and honesty, but I despise your foolish loyalty. If you don't even know how to choose, you don't deserve to be the king of the raging flame divine nation. Reveal Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts, or implicate millions of people to die with you. Choose for yourself. No matter what, it was time to make a choice. Xue Changyi couldn't avoid it. He endured unparalleled psychological pressure and slowly turned to look at the 9 balls of divine light. His gaze swept over the 3,000 royal family members. From everyone's expression and eyes, he saw the desire and urgency to survive, as well as anxiety and fear. Among them were his concubines and children as well as his brothers, nephews, trusted ministers, and so on. In the face of death, everyone chose to plead and persuade him. After all, he owed Grand Prince Lian a favor, but they didn't. But everyone's life and death were now in his hands. After a long time, Xue Changyi looked around and slowly retracted his gaze. He turned around and his expression became dejected and helpless, as if he had aged a few decades in an instant. He smiled bitterly and lowered his head. He didn't look at Ji Tianxing's expression and said bitterly, forget it, forget it. Since I'm the king of the divine nation, how can I act willfully and willfully? At that time, I'll most likely become a fatuous king condemned by everyone. A ruthless king who doesn't care about the lives of his people. A sinner who caused the destruction of the divine nation. Hearing this, the 3,000 royal family members were obviously relieved. They all revealed expressions of relief. Everyone knew that Xue Changyi couldn't go against the will of the people and could only choose to compromise. As expected, Xue Changyi's voice was dry as he said, Young Master Tianxing, I've agreed to your conditions, so please keep your promise. To be honest, when you fought with more than 10,000 soldiers and many divine lords self-destructed, Grand Prince Lian quietly left the royal city. He brought his trusted aides through the teleportation divine formation in the palace and directly arrived at the border of the Raging Flame County Furious River City. Calculating the time, he should have already left Furious River City and entered the Rock Magus County in the south. This time he lost to you and his forces were almost wiped out. He can no longer establish himself in the Raging Flame Divine Nation. Next he should return to the Great Yan Empire to recuperate for a while. As for where he will go, I don't know. Book Guest House Reading Website. Shouldn't you fulfill your promise? Ji Tianxing collected his thoughts, glanced at him and said indifferently, this monarch is a man of his word. I will naturally fulfill my promise. With that he waved his arm and removed the heaven-destroying sword formation. The 20,000 swords that had been hovering in the night sky and covering Royal City immediately disappeared without a trace. Instantly Royal City, which had been illuminated by the sword light until it was as bright as day, also became dim. The 3,000 royal family members looked as if they had been pardoned. They revealed expressions of joy as if they had just survived a disaster. The tens of thousands of people in Royal City had been trembling with fear and despair. Now that the sword formation had disappeared, they all breathed a sigh of relief. Countless people cried out in surprise and whispered in each other's ears. Many people saw that the once dazzling palace had been reduced to ruins. Everyone was discussing and guessing what had happened in the royal palace. Who was so powerful that they could destroy the royal palace? Could it be that Tianxing who had been rumored to be the god of slaughter? At the same time, Xianxia saw that Ji Tianxing was a man of his word and also breathed a sigh of relief. He hurriedly bowed and said, "Thank you, young Master Tianxing, for your mercy." Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said in a low voice, "Xianxia, I'll give you a word of advice. Grand Prince Lian opposed this monarch and he won't live long. You don't have to be blindly loyal to him. You must always remember that you are the monarch of the Raging Flame Divine Country. You don't have the right to be willful. You must put the overall situation and the divine country and its hundreds of millions of people before you make any decision. Otherwise, you will destroy the Raging Flame Divine Country sooner or later." Xianxia was startled. He didn't expect that Ji Tianxing, who was his enemy, would give him pointers. After frowning and thinking for a moment, he remembered Ji Tianxing's words in his heart and sincerely thanked him. "Thank you, young Master Tianxing, for your pointers. This monarch will definitely remember it." Ji Tianxing didn't say anything else and expressionlessly asked, "Where is the teleportation array leading to the border of Raging Flame County?" Xianxia knew that he was leaving Royal City and was secretly relieved. He hurriedly replied, "It's in the Huayang Divine Palace. That's Grand Prince Lian's residence in Royal City. Many years ago he had this monarch build that divine array in the Huayang Divine Palace." Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and said in a deep voice, "Damn it. With Grand Prince Lian's way of doing things, he will definitely have that divine array destroyed after he leaves. Quickly take this monarch there." Xianxia also understood his meaning and didn't dare to delay. Chapter 3178. Although the lives of Xianxia, the royal family, and the officials were saved, the palace was destroyed. However, the destruction of the palace and the deaths of tens of thousands of imperial guards, servants and guards were also a huge loss. It would take a long time to rebuild the palace and reorganize the imperial guards, servants and guards. It would consume a lot of manpower and resources. This was a heavy blow to the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom. Just treat it as a punishment for me. Give me an unforgettable lesson. Xianxia sighed and began to issue orders, dispatching the officials and the royal family to prepare to rebuild the palace. The royal family and the officials who had narrowly escaped death were no longer hostile to Xianxia. They happily accepted the orders and went to carry out the mission. Soon the news spread from the palace and spread throughout the royal city. 2 hours later, at daybreak, all the people in the city knew the whole story. When everyone found out that there was only one person among the thousands of soldiers and strong enemies they had expected, they were all stunned. And when they learned that the person who destroyed the palace and slaughtered tens of thousands of people was Grim Reaper Tianxing, they were even more terrified. Later, another piece of news spread that before Tianxing broke into the royal city, he had fought a decisive battle with more than 10,000 soldiers on Celestial Dragon Mountain. In the end, Tianxing won a complete victory, killing more than 10,000 soldiers and forcing many divine lords to self-detonate. This made the people in the city even more shocked. It was as if they were listening to a heavenly book. This series of news set off a shocking hurricane in the royal city, igniting everyone's enthusiasm. The commoners were suddenly enlightened. No wonder there was a divine light that shot into the sky and covered half of the night sky. More people rejoiced and felt a lingering fear. Fortunately, Grim Reaper Tianqing's target was clear and he didn't attack the people of the royal city. Otherwise, if that sword array had gone all out, the entire royal city would have been turned into ruins and all the people would have died. Thus the people felt more and more reverence for Grim Reaper Tianqing. Many people were thinking about the rumors circulating in the Divine Kingdom, saying that Tianqing was a villain and a Grim Reaper who killed people like scything flax. It seemed that the rumors weren't true. That Grim Reaper didn't kill the innocent and had the demeanor of a powerhouse. As time passed, 1 day, 2 days, 3 days passed. The news of the battle and the destruction of the royal palace also spread out of the royal city and spread throughout the Raging Flame Divine Kingdom. A few days later, this series of news spread out of the Raging Flame Divine Nation and spread to the surrounding countries, including the Great Yan Empire. Or, the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect? The imperial capital of the Great Yan Empire was the territory of the Great Yan Emperor. Prince Lian and the Great Yan Emperor had a grudge against each other for killing his mother. Moreover, he had caused a huge commotion in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine Nations. Otherwise, the Great Yan Emperor would definitely find a reason to punish him after seeing his wild ambitions. As for hiding in a desolate place, Ji Tianqing did not think it was likely. Prince Lian was used to being high and mighty. He lived like a prince and could command many experts at any time. If he hid in a desolate place, he would be safe. However, he and his subordinates would be cut off from the outside world. Moreover, the conditions in a desolate place were harsh and not suitable for recuperation. After thinking about it, the most likely place Prince Lian could hide was the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. Prince Lian's biggest backer is the Heavenly Union sect. He'll only be safe and convenient if he hides in the headquarters. Moreover, he might be hoping that I won't dare to look for him because of the Heavenly Union sect's power and prestige. Ji Tianqing muttered to himself as a mocking sneer appeared on his face. Prince Lian, oh Prince Lian, it's useless even if you hide in the Great Yan Emperor's palace, let alone the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. If I want to kill you, you won't be able to escape death no matter where you run to. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing decided to leave the Raging Flame Divine Nation as soon as possible. Flying was too slow. He planned to look for a teleportation divine formation after entering Rockwich County. It should save him a lot of time. After entering the Great Yan Empire, he would head to the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect. At that time he would try to kill Prince Lian and end this grudge. He would try his best not to implicate the innocent. If the Heavenly Union sect was tactful and did not interfere in his grudge with Prince Lian, they would be spared. If the Heavenly Union sect interfered, protected Prince Lian, or even attacked him with all their might, he did not mind destroying the Heavenly Union sect. Chapter 3179. Great Yan Empire. This was a vast and resource-rich super-divine nation. At the same time, it was also the northernmost empire in the Tianbei region. It had been tens of thousands of years since the Great Yan Empire was established. It could be said that its foundation was extremely strong. There were 18 subsidiary divine nations under its command and hundreds of billions of people. The Great Yan Empire was located in the center, and the 18 divine nations surrounded it, forming a protective formation. As for the Great Yan Empire's territory, it was about 5 times the size of the Bloodfire Divine Nation and more than 4 times the Raging Flame Divine Nation. Until now, the Great Yan Empire had 78 counties, thousands of main cities and tens of thousands of strategic towns. The Yan royal family that ruled the empire had been passed down for more than 50,000 years and was a veritable ancient noble family. The Yan bloodline was very noble and powerful. In terms of grade, it could reach the supreme grade monarch level and was very close to the quasi-king level. As long as one was a descendant of the Yan family, as long as one did not have any congenital defects and had normal aptitude and comprehension, one could basically become a high-rank godly lord. In fact, some extremely talented geniuses even had a glimmer of hope to become an unparalleled godly king. It was a pity that since ancient times, the Yan family had only produced one godly king. That was more than 40,000 years ago, and that godly king expert had long disappeared without a trace. Ever since the Great Yan Empire was established, The Yan family had had a great goal since the first emperor. That was to nurture an unparalleled godly king. Only then could they lead the great Yan Empire to the peak, crush the other empires and laugh proudly in the Tianbei region. However, this wish had never been realized. For 30,000 years, the Yan royal family had never produced a godly king expert. The strongest were only the previous emperors. They had all reached the limit of the divine lord realm and were only one step away from becoming a godly king. However, that one step was like a natural chasm that could not be crossed. After the previous emperors passed down the throne, they focused on cultivating in seclusion and worked hard to break through to the godly king realm. However, there were 3 old emperors who had cultivated for thousands of years and still could not break through. They lost the patience to cultivate in seclusion and left the great Yan Empire to travel the boundless heaven continent in search of opportunities to break through. No one knew if they succeeded or if they died outside. In short, there was no news of those old emperors. Until now, only the previous emperor and the emperor before that were still in seclusion in the Great Yan Empire. The previous emperor was the father of the current emperor of Great Yan. He was known as the retired emperor. He should be entering the empire soon. The Black Flame governor had reported a lot of information before. These few sentences were just a summary. The emperor was silent for a moment. He did not comment. Instead he asked, "What about old Eighth? He was defeated so miserably. He should be running back like a stray dog, right?" The old Eighth he was referring to was the 8th prince who was the current Prince Lian. The Black Flame governor said calmly, "Prince Lian left Raging Flame capital on the night of the final battle and returned to the empire. Just last night he returned to the empire with his followers and confidants. According to the informants at the border, Prince Lian did not seem to be returning to the imperial capital. He seemed to be heading toward the heavenly sect." The emperor sneered and said, No matter how big the imperial capital is, it is not his home. Although the 8th prince's mansion is still there, it is covered with dust and has been abandoned. How can he come back? Now, other than the Heavenly Union sect, where else can he go?" The Black Flame governor did not comment on this. He just asked calmly, "Your Majesty, please make a decision. How should we deal with Prince Lian?" The emperor leaned back on the divine jade chair and sneered mockingly. "Old Eighth has been defeated so miserably. Let him hide and recuperate for a few years. He is still too inexperienced. He thinks he is doing things secretly, but how can he escape from my eyes? When I sent him to the Blood Flame Divine Nation, I guessed that he was harboring evil intentions and plotting revenge. When he was gathering forces in the various divine nations and building a team, I pretended not to know and turned a blind eye. After all, those forces are not strong enough to threaten me. I just ascended the throne not long ago and I just killed Old Fourth and their mother. If I punish Old Eighth, the people will scold me for being heartless and cold-blooded. I didn't expect that a young man from another race called Tianxing would suddenly appear and have a conflict with Old Eighth. Moreover, that kid is so brave that he actually destroyed Old Eighth's force and defeated him so miserably. Speaking of which, I have to thank that kid for eliminating Old Eighth's force for me." The Black Flame governor understood the emperor's meaning and asked again, "How do you plan to deal with that kid, Your Majesty?" The emperor frowned and said in a deep voice, "I don't want to deal with him, but the Great Yan Empire does not welcome him." Translator, Atlas Studios Editor, Atlas Studios. It was obvious that Ji Tianxing had exposed himself and was discovered by the other party. Could it be that another battle was about to break out? Ji Tianxing thought to himself. He was not afraid of fighting. If they really fought, he could destroy the entire Yunwu Pass within 2 hours, wiping out hundreds of thousands of soldiers. However, was there a need to start a massacre? If he really killed the 180,000 soldiers of Cloud Mist Pass, the Emperor of Great Yan would definitely fly into a rage and order everyone to surround and annihilate him. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing decided not to make a move first and act according to the circumstances. At this moment, the 2 powerhouses in luxurious robes in the lead spoke first. An old man with white hair and a beard looked at Ji Tianxing expressionlessly and said, "If I'm not mistaken, you're Tianxing, aren't you?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and asked, "The 2 of you don't look like the guards of Cloud Mist Pass. You look more like you're waiting for me here?" The other middle-aged man nodded and said with a faint smile, "You're smart to be able to guess this. To tell you the truth, Elder Yuan and I are His Majesty's Imperial envoys." We were ordered to wait for you here and pass on a message to you. Realization dawned on Ji Tianxing. At the same time, more questions appeared in his mind. Great Yan's imperial envoys? They've been waiting for me here? He frowned. He had a bad feeling about this. After all, he had caused an earth-shattering battle in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine nations. He had even killed the Blood Flame Divine Sovereign. The Great Yan Emperor had eyes and ears all over the Divine nations. He must have known the truth long ago. However, the Great Yan Emperor had never asked about it and pretended not to know anything. Now that he had come to Cloud Mist Pass, the Great Yan Emperor had sent someone to wait for him here and pass on a message. No matter how he looked at it, this was not good news. As expected, the white-bearded old man stared at Ji Tianxing and said in a dignified tone, "Tianxing, the matter between you and Prince Lian is a personal grudge. You caused such a huge commotion in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine nations. It's also a matter between you and the two Divine nations. His Majesty is well aware of all this, but he didn't interfere. This is because His Majesty is a benevolent and righteous ruler. He only protects the citizens of the Great Yan Empire and won't interfere with the internal affairs of the other divine nations. However, it's impossible for you to break into Cloud Mist Pass and even enter the Great Yan Empire tonight. His Majesty has said that you're not welcome in the Great Yan Empire. Please leave." The middle-aged man said in a dignified tone, "Tianxing, no matter how powerful you are or how bloodthirsty you are, His Majesty can ignore you as long as you don't threaten the Great Yan Empire." Chapter 3181. The Rock Witch Commandery Princess thought that Ji Tianxing had other intentions. It was either to rob or to kill. After all, this person was known as the Killing God. The Rock Witch Commandery Princess naturally thought that it was related to killing. Who knew that Ji Tianxing's request would be so simple? He just wanted to borrow the teleportation formation. Hearing this, the Rock Magus Infanta relaxed. Her heart that had been hanging in the air also calmed down. He let out a long sigh and a smile appeared on his face. He said politely, "Ah, so it's about this. I thought it was something else. Mr. Tianxing, don't worry. How can I not help you with such a small matter? Do you want to use it now or when? How about this, since it's your first time in the Rock Witch Commandery as the host, I have to be a good host and treat you well." The last sentence was, of course, a meaningless courtesy. The Rock Witch Commandery Princess's real thoughts were that she wanted this killing god to leave quickly. How could she waste any more time with him? However, she could not show it. She was very cautious in front of Ji Tianxing. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing's reply allowed him to heave a sigh of relief. "Don't waste any more time. I will leave now." The Rock Witch Commandery Princess finally confirmed that Ji Tianxing only had this request and no other purpose. She was completely relieved. Without hesitation, she opened the door of the secret chamber and led Ji Tianxing out of the secret chamber. "Mr. Tianxing, please follow me." Then the two of them passed through the dark tunnel and entered the center of the underground palace. They entered a spacious hall. There were 8 lower divine lords guarding the hall. They were all cultivating in their own secret chambers. Once someone approached the hall, the 8 divine lords would be awakened. Although they did not know Ji Tianxing, they saw the Rock Witch Commandery Princess leading Ji Tianxing into the hall. Then they stayed in the secret chamber and did not move. The dark hall was silent. There was only a large formation on the ground in the middle of the hall. The Rock Witch Commandery Princess walked to the center of the formation and personally cast a spell to activate the formation. Soon, a white door of light that was more than 10 feet tall appeared in the middle of the formation. Rock Magus Countess finished casting the spell and bowed to Ji Tianxing. She said, "Young Master Tianxing, the teleportation divine formation has been opened. It can reach Xiangliu City at the border." Ji Tianxing nodded. He stepped into the formation and walked into the teleportation gate. Shwa! With a flash of white light, Ji Tianxing's figure disappeared into the light gate. Seeing that he had really left, the Rock Witch Infanta's tense nerves relaxed. She let out a long breath and wiped the cold on her forehead. Phew! Fortunately, this death god only wanted to borrow the teleportation array and had no other intentions. Otherwise, the consequences would have been unimaginable. After muttering to himself, he began to close the teleportation divine array. When he left the hall, he muttered to himself, "Although this god of death's strength is unfathomable, his nature doesn't seem to be as cruel as the rumors say." The distance between Rock Witch County City and Willow City was tens of millions of miles. With Ji Tianxing's speed he would need to fly for at least 3 days to arrive. However, using the teleportation divine array, he only needed a breath's time to arrive. When he appeared in Willow City, he was standing in an underground palace. There were several hundred guards standing guard around the palace, and there was even a lower divine lord overseeing it. When everyone saw Ji Tianxing suddenly appear, they were all stunned for a moment. Then they surrounded him. Vigilantly they gripped their swords and blades, staring at Ji Tianxing fiercely. Once Ji Tianxing showed hostility and killing intent, they would not hesitate to attack. If Ji Tianxing showed any signs of cowardice, fear or guilt, they would surround him and capture him. However, Ji Tianxing ignored them and left the underground palace expressionlessly. He used the teleportation technique and left Willow City in a flash. He continued to fly towards the south. The hundreds of guards in the underground palace all looked at each other in dismay, their hearts filled with doubt. A guard captain plucked up his courage and asked the low-level divine lord, "Commander, who was that foreign race kid? Why didn't we stop him and interrogate him?" The low-level divine lord glared at him and shouted coldly, "Are you out of your mind? That person's strength is unfathomable. Do you want to die? Moreover, he came from Wuxia County City. He must have been approved by the princess. Why do we need to interrogate him?" The guard captain shrunk his neck and quickly apologized. Not long after, Ji Tianxing left Wuxia County City. 3 days later he arrived at Cultivation County City. This time he did the same thing. He quietly broke into the princess's mansion to borrow the teleportation divine array. To his surprise, the princess was not in the mansion. He did not know where she had gone to do some errands. The person with the highest status in the princess's mansion was the princess's son. He was a frivolous and dissolute playboy. Ji Tianxing used a little trick to capture the princess's son. He was so scared that he almost wet his pants. He did not even say his name, but the princess's son was so scared that he begged for mercy and agreed to open the teleportation divine array. This made things even simpler. Ji Tianxing carried the princess's son and entered the underground hall. The princess's son ordered the guards guarding the altar to activate the divine teleportation array as soon as possible. After a while, the teleportation divine array was opened. Ji Tianxing let go of the princess's son and left. Just like that, he quickly left Cultivation County and continued to rush towards the south. In the next few days he passed through a few counties and used the same method. The princess of each county was intimidated by his name. They did not even dare to resist or call for help. The few princesses' sons sensibly opened the teleportation divine array and sent him off respectfully. Unknowingly, 10 days passed. On the 10th night, Ji Tianxing finally left the raging flame divine nation and stepped onto the border of the Great Yan Empire. What appeared in front of him was a boundless and majestic mountain range. One after another, giant peaks more than 2,000 feet tall stood on the ground. Half of the mountain was shrouded in clouds and mist. This was the border between the raging flame divine nation and the Great Yan Empire, the famous Cloud Mountain Range. 500 miles in front of Ji Tianxing was the Cloud Mountain Pass, the northern border of the Great Yan Empire. More than 100,000 soldiers were stationed there, and there were high-level divine lords guarding it. Ji Tianxing flew through the night sky at a moderate speed and rushed towards the Cloud Mountain Pass. Along the way he was still thinking to himself, Prince Lian should have used the teleportation divine arrays in the various counties to escape the raging flame divine nation. He left 2 hours earlier than me and I did not waste any time. I should not be far from him. Given his mentality, he should be relaxed after escaping the raging flame divine nation and finally entering the Great Yan Empire. The Cloud Mountain Pass was guarded by a large army and high-level divine lords. Could be said that it was very safe. He should have escaped into the Cloud Mountain Pass and used the teleportation divine array there to return to the Great Yan Empire. I have to go to the Cloud Mountain Pass to investigate. If he has not left, that would be great. Even if he has already left the Cloud Mountain Pass, I can still find out where he went. Chapter 3182. Ji Tianxing knew that it was unlikely that Grand Prince Lian was still in Yunwu Pass. However, it was like looking for a needle in a haystack for him to kill Grand Prince Lian now. Under such circumstances, he had to try as long as there was a slight possibility. Otherwise, he would regret it if he missed the best chance to kill Grand Prince Lian. Swoosh. Ji Tianxing flew across the night sky and soon he had traveled 500 miles and arrived at the Cloud Mist Pass. There was a deep canyon in front of him. It was filled with towering trees and thick clouds. On both sides of the mountain were 3,000 feet tall, extremely steep and dangerous. However, the two mountains were not far apart, only about 100 miles apart. The soldiers of the Great Yan Empire had built a floating city at the peak of the two mountains to connect the two mountains. The floating city floating in the sea of clouds was only 100 miles in radius, but it looked very prosperous with many palaces and tall buildings. There were also flat open spaces on both sides of the mountains. Barracks and armory were built. 180,000 border soldiers were stationed in the barracks and the floating city. Although it was late at night, there were still many soldiers patrolling around the floating city. The city was still lit. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing used his invisibility divine ability and flew toward the floating city silently. What surprised him was that the floating city and the two barracks were protected by Supreme Monarch-level divine arrays. The defense divine array of the floating city was fully activated. It shone with dazzling divine light in the night sky. He had to break the divine array if he wanted to enter the floating city. Therefore he did not waste any time. He dodged a few patrolling soldiers and started to break the divine array. It was not difficult for him to break the Supreme Monarch-level divine array, but it would take him a long time. Moreover, he had to keep using his divine power while breaking the divine array. It was difficult to hide. Half an hour passed. Ji Tianxing finally broke the divine array and tore a hole in the five-colored light shield. He had just passed through the hole and entered the floating city when he saw a large number of soldiers gathered in the open space in front of him. There were thousands of elite black-armored soldiers led by 4 low-ranked divine lords. They were in a neat formation and were waiting for him. There were 3 powerhouses at the front of the battle formation. They were also staring at him coldly. One of them was a high-ranked divine lord in armor. His strength was at the 7th heaven realm. He looked like a general guarding Yunwu Pass. The other 2 high-ranked divine lords were dressed in luxurious robes. They exuded a dignified and noble aura. Their strength was at the 8th heaven realm. It was obvious that Ji Tianxing had exposed himself and was discovered by the enemy. Was he going to have to fight another battle? Ji Tianxing thought to himself. He wasn't afraid of fighting. If a fight really broke out, he could destroy the entire Yunwu Pass within 2 hours, wiping out hundreds of thousands of soldiers. However, was there a need to kill them all? If he really killed the 180,000 soldiers of Cloud Mist Pass, the Great Yan Emperor would definitely fly into a rage and order all forces to surround and annihilate him. Thinking of this, Ji Tianxing decided not to make a move first and act according to the circumstances. At this moment, the 2 powerhouses in luxurious robes in the lead spoke first. A white-haired old man from the God clan looked at Ji Tianxing expressionlessly and said, "If I'm not mistaken, you're Tianxing, aren't you?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and asked, "The 2 of you don't look like the guards of Yunwu Pass. Are you waiting for me here?" The other middle-aged man nodded and said with a smile, "You're smart to be able to guess this. To tell you the truth, Elder Yuan and I are His Majesty's Imperial envoys. We were ordered to wait for you here and pass on a message to you." Realization dawned on Ji Tianxing. At the same time, more questions appeared in his mind. Great Yan's Emperor's Imperial envoys? They're waiting for me here? He frowned. He had a bad feeling about this. After all, he had caused an earth-shattering battle in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine nations. He had even killed the Blood Flame Divine Sovereign. The Great Yan Emperor had eyes and ears all over the divine nations. He must have known the truth long ago. However, the Great Yan Emperor had never asked about it and pretended not to know anything. Now that he had come to Yunwu Pass, the Great Yan Emperor had sent someone to wait for him here and pass on a message. No matter how he looked at it, this was not good news. As expected, the white-haired old man stared at Ji Tianxing and said in a dignified tone, "Tianxing, the matter between you and Prince Lian is a personal grudge. You caused such a huge commotion in the Blood Flame and Raging Flame Divine nations. It's also a matter between you and the 2 divine nations. His Majesty is well aware of all this, but he didn't interfere. His Majesty is a benevolent and righteous ruler. He only protects the citizens of the Great Yan Empire and won't interfere with the internal affairs of the other divine nations. However, it's impossible for you to break into Yunwu Pass and even step into the Great Yan Empire tonight. His Majesty has said that you're not welcome in the Great Yan Empire. Please leave." The middle-aged man said in a dignified tone, Tianxing, no matter how powerful you are or how bloodthirsty you are, His Majesty can ignore you as long as you don't threaten the Great Yan Empire. However, if you enter the Great Yan Empire, you'll endanger the safety of the citizens. Chapter 3183. Tianxing spoke the truth. But to the two imperial envoys and the general, they felt that his words were sarcastic and full of sarcasm. The three of them didn't look too good. They muttered to themselves for a while and secretly communicated with each other. The white-bearded old man sighed. His Majesty is indeed wise. He guessed that this guy would chase after Grand Prince Lian and boldly barge into Yunwu Pass. The middle-aged man frowned and said in a displeased tone, "This guy is very arrogant. He doesn't even respect His Majesty. If it weren't for His Majesty's orders, I would have taken action and extinguished his arrogance." The white-bearded old man said with a bitter smile, "Don't be angry. If you really took action and taught him a lesson, you would have been defeated in a few moves. Don't forget, this guy is very strong. Even a grand prince has been defeated by him. Moreover, this guy is ruthless and bloodthirsty. He doesn't care about our identities." The middle-aged man's face darkened and he didn't say anything else. The golden-armored general asked, "Imperial envoys, what do we do now? Should we tell him the truth?" The middle-aged man didn't make the decision on his own. He looked at the white-bearded old man and asked for his opinion. The white-bearded old man thought for a while and nodded. He transmitted, "It's better to avoid trouble. The grudge between this guy and Grand Prince Lian has nothing to do with us. There's no need to hide it for Grand Prince Lian. What's more, what he said wasn't wrong. If he can find Grand Prince Lian and kill him, it'll be considered a meritorious service. However, we can only keep these things in our hearts. We can't criticize him." The middle-aged man and the golden-armored general both nodded in agreement. The white-bearded old man looked at Tianxing and said, "Tianxing, I'm an imperial envoy appointed by His Majesty. I'm only here to carry out His Majesty's orders. I've already passed on the message to you. As for Grand Prince Lian's whereabouts and direction, I have no obligation to tell you. However, I see that you're in high spirits and dignified. You're not as ruthless and bloodthirsty as the rumors say. Therefore, I'm not telling you as an imperial envoy. I'm telling you as an individual. Grand Prince Lian isn't in Yunwu Pass. He hasn't even been here. However, he entered the Empire's territory a day ago. As for which direction he went, this old man has no idea." After saying this, the white-bearded old man quietly looked at Tianxing without saying another word. He had already said what he needed to say. Moreover, he had done Tianxing a favor in his personal capacity. If Tianxing continued to pester him, it would be Tianxing being unreasonable. In fact, Tianxing was well aware of this. Not only did he know that the white-bearded old man had done him a favor, he also knew why the old man had done so. As it turned out, Great Yan's emperor's attitude toward him was complicated and contradictory. They wanted to use him to get rid of Grand Prince Lian, but they were also afraid that he would cause trouble in the Great Yan Empire. If he could kill Grand Prince Lian, not only would he have gotten rid of a thorn in the Great Yan Emperor's side, but the Great Yan Emperor would also not have to pay any price, let alone bear the infamy. However, the Great Yan Emperor was also worried that if he went on a killing spree in the Great Yan Empire, he would incur the wrath of the people. At that time, no matter how unwilling the Great Yan Emperor was, he would have to send troops to kill Tianxing to restore the prestige of the nation. He had to maintain his glorious image of loving the people like his own children to secure his position as emperor. Otherwise, he would be impeached and criticized by the diehards. However, the Great Yan Emperor knew that no matter how many elite troops he sent, they might not be able to kill Tianxing. Instead, they would suffer heavy losses and sink deeper into the abyss. Once Tianxing and the Great Yan Empire had a blood feud, there would be no way to salvage the situation. Even if the Great Yan Empire managed to kill Tianxing in the end, they would suffer heavy losses. All in all, the Great Yan Emperor's thoughts were complicated. As an imperial envoy and a trusted aide of the Great Yan Emperor, the white-bearded old man naturally understood the emperor's thoughts. However, he could not say it out loud lest he hurt the emperor's reputation. Therefore, he very cleverly chose to tell Tianxing in his personal capacity. The twists and turns in this matter were not something an ordinary person could figure out. Tianxing raised an eyebrow. He cupped his fists at the white-bearded old man and said, "Thank you for telling me. In that case, I'll take my leave now." After he finished speaking, he turned around and left cloud mist pass through the gap in the divine formation. Everyone stood where they were and watched Ji Tianxing's figure disappear into the night sky. They were silent for a while. The golden-armored general waved his hand, signaling the 1,000 elite soldiers to retreat. Only the white-bearded old man, the middle-aged man, and the golden-armored general were left. The three of them began to discuss. The middle-aged man frowned in confusion and muttered, "That kid's way of doing things is indeed different from what the rumors say. He doesn't seem like a vicious and bloodthirsty executioner who will stop at nothing." The white-bearded old man stroked his beard and nodded. Putting aside the grudge between him and Prince Lian, he's a peak-stage divine lord at such a young age. He can be said to be a once-in-a-lifetime genius. Such peerless geniuses are usually very proud. How can he be a villain who won't stop at nothing? The golden-armored general breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "I originally thought that this person would be very difficult to deal with and that there would most likely be a fierce battle tonight. I didn't expect that he would be sent away so easily. Elder Yuan is really courageous to actually be able to intimidate him." The white-bearded old man stroked his beard and laughed self-deprecatingly. "General Wang, don't make fun of this old man. How can this old man have the ability to intimidate the famous killing god? It's His Majesty's prestige that killing god is afraid of and does not dare to offend. Furthermore, killing god is not a reckless person. Of course he knows how to weigh the pros and cons. He only has a grudge with Prince Lian. He has no grudge with us. Why should he make things difficult for us and become enemies with the Empire?" The golden-armored general nodded repeatedly in agreement. The middle-aged man thought for a while and asked again, "Elder Yuan, is that kid really willing to leave just like that? Why did he believe your words without any doubt?" The white-bearded old man chuckled and said, "Firstly, this old man has no need to lie to him. There is no need for me to cover for Prince Lian. He is well aware of it. Secondly, do you think he didn't investigate? When we were negotiating, he had already secretly released his divine sense and searched the floating city several times. He didn't find any trace of Prince Lian, nor did he detect the aura left behind by Prince Lian. Of course he has to believe this old man." The golden-armored general was even more impressed and flattered the white-bearded old man a few more times. The middle-aged man nodded slightly and thought for a while before continuing to ask, "Then in Elder Yuan's opinion, where will that kid go after leaving Yunwu Pass? Will he really be intimidated and not step into the Empire's territory?" The white-bearded old man shook his head again and chuckled. "Of course not. He is arrogant and lawless. How can he be intimidated by a few words from us? If he doesn't step into the Empire's territory, how will he hunt down Prince Lian? This is something that His Majesty has long anticipated." Chapter 3184. As it turned out, the white-bearded old man was a sly old fox. His speculation about Ji Tianxing was spot on. On the surface, it seemed like Ji Tianxing had been intercepted as soon as he entered the floating city. However, in truth, when he was negotiating with the two imperial envoys, he had secretly scouted the entire floating city. The white-bearded old man did not lie to him. Prince Lian was indeed not in the floating city and had not been to Cloud Mist Pass. That was why Ji Tianxing had left without wasting any time. After leaving Cloud Mist Pass, he did not return to the Raging Flame Divine Nation. Instead, he stepped into the Great Yan Empire's territory. However, he went around Cloud Mist Pass, crossed a desolate mountain range and entered Great Yan's territory. As for the direction of flight, it was, of course, southeast. His next destination was Thousand Sun Lake in Thousand Sun County. That was where the Heavenly Union Sect's headquarters was located. Ji Tianxing had expected Prince Lian to hide in the Heavenly Union Sect since he did not dare to return to the imperial capital. Currently, Prince Lian had not passed through Cloud Mist Pass and had fled to the Great Yan Empire. He had not come into contact with the Great Yan Emperor's men at all. This proved that Prince Lian was not only guarding against Ji Tianxing, but he was also guarding against the Great Yan Emperor's attacks. No matter how cunning and cautious you are, you still have to hide from the Heavenly Union Sect. No matter what, the Heavenly Union Sect's headquarters is at Thousand Sun Lake. There's no way you can run away. As Ji Tianxing hurried along, he calculated in his mind and sneered playfully. At this moment, Lin Shue's voice rang in his mind. "Brat, why aren't you fighting with the people of the Great Yan Empire?" Lin Shui left emissary Jin, and the others were recuperating and cultivating in the divine ship. On the second day of the battle on Sky Dragon Mountain, they eagerly asked Ji Tianxing about the results of the battle. Ji Tianxing told them the truth. They were shocked beyond words. After a long time of excitement, Lin Shui and the others finally calmed down. Then Lin Shui began to complain about Ji Tianxing. Why did he kill the 13,000 soldiers alone and not give her a chance to fight? Although Lord Blood Illusion left Emissary Jean, and the others did not say anything, they felt it was a pity. They had only participated in the initial battle, but had not been able to accompany Ji Tianxing to the end. As a result, news of that earth-shattering battle spread throughout the divine nations and Ji Tianxing's name spread throughout the world. On the other hand, they were unknown and had missed the opportunity to make a name for themselves. Regarding this, Ji Tianxing's reaction was very calm. He consoled them. The battle that day was too intense. Ji Tianxing nodded. He asked, "What else can I do? Prince Lian is running for his life in a hurry. He didn't have time to come up with a plan. This is the best opportunity to get rid of him. If I waste my time and give him a chance to catch his breath, I'm afraid there'll be more variables." Lin Shui said disdainfully, "Aren't you just wasting your time if you travel alone?" Ji Tianxing was speechless. He could only bring out the divine warship. Swoosh! There was a flash of divine light. The pitch-black divine warship flew into the night sky and quickly returned to its original size of 10,000 feet. Ji Tianxing entered the divine warship in a flash. He walked into the control room and saw Lin Shui activating the formation. She was going to operate the divine formation herself. Hence he could not help but ask, "Why are you alone? Where are left Emissary Jean and right Emissary Blood Dragon? Aren't you going to let them pilot the divine warship?" Lin Shui glanced at him and said, "They're still recovering and cultivating. There's no need for them to show their faces. I'll personally pilot the divine warship for you. It's much faster than them. This is the only way to save you time. Do you understand?" Ji Tianxing spread his hands and said, "Since you're so considerate, what else can I say?" Lin Shui glared at him again and said unhappily, "Then go and rest. I'll be enough to pilot the divine warship alone. I'll inform you when something happens." Ji Tianxing was a little worried. He asked, "Do you know where the headquarters of the Heavenly Union sect is?" Lin Shui was stunned. Then she snorted and said, "Of course I don't know. Then why don't you tell me?" Ji Tianxing was speechless again. "Why are you so arrogant if you don't know? Thousand Sun County, Thousand Sun Lake. Just fly southeast. It'll take you at least 20 days to reach there." I know. You can go now," Lin Shui urged impatiently. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more words with her. He got up and left the control room. When he returned to the secret room, he took out the Jiutian 10 Absolutes Pagoda and entered the distorted spacetime to cultivate. Chapter 3186. Naturally, Prince Lian was not worried that Ji Tianxing would catch up to him. First, his warship was much faster than Lin Shui's monarch-grade high-grade divine warship. Second, he could use the teleportation divine formations in the various counties. No one would dare to stop him. However, Ji Tianxing would not dare to do that unless he wanted to make an enemy out of the Great Yan Emperor and declare war on the Great Yan Empire. At this moment, Prince Lian was worried about another problem. Naturally, he would not be caught or intercepted by Ji Tianxing as he fled back to the Unity Heaven sect. However, what would happen after he fled to the Unity Heaven sect? Would he be able to cultivate in seclusion without any worries? Prince Lian was not so sure. He had a big question mark on his mind. The hidden chamber fell silent. Since Prince Lian did not speak, Lian San could only stand quietly. Time passed quietly. About half an hour later, another divines in black armor walked briskly into the hidden chamber. It was Lian Si. He quickly walked up to Prince Lian and bowed respectfully. "Lian Si greets your highness." Prince Lian had been waiting for him. When he saw that Lian Si had finally arrived, he hurriedly waved his hand to dismiss him. He asked, "Lian Si, did the headquarters reply?" Lian Si respectfully replied, "Reporting to your highness just a moment ago, this subordinate received a message from the vice sect leader. The vice sect master said that there's been a breakthrough in the Verdant Jade Palace recently. The 50-faction alliance has successfully broken through 2 grand formations and arrived at the palace's gates. Everyone was overjoyed. Originally, the sect master had been guarding the verdant jade palace with 18 elders, reverends, and 300 elite disciples. However, after this incident, the dozens of factions were eager to make a move. They secretly mobilized their forces and gathered at the verdant jade palace. This was because once the verdant jade palace's gates were opened, the factions would fight for a spot to enter the palace. Hence, 10 days ago the sect master mobilized some people and sent them to the verdant jade palace. Among them there are 2 grand elders for consecrators and 200 elite disciples. When Prince Lian heard the first half of the message, he was happy and expectant. After all, he was determined to obtain the verdant jade palace. However, when he heard the second half of the story, his expression darkened and his eyes were filled with worry. He stared at Xianxia with a dignified gaze and asked in a deep voice, "Who is left in the headquarters?" Xianxia was intimidated by the powerful pressure. He lowered his head in fear and replied truthfully, replying to the prince, "The defense of the headquarters is currently very weak. Only the vice-sect master, 3 elders, 12 deacons, 200 elite disciples, 5,000 ordinary disciples, and more than 10,000 servants are left." Although Prince Lian was already mentally prepared when he heard the news, his vision still went dark and he almost couldn't help but curse. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He had to take a few deep breaths to suppress his anger. Damn it! Ever since I joined the heavenly sect, when has the headquarters ever been so defenseless? Why did such a thing happen when this king was returning to the headquarters? Why? Is this the will of the heavens? Prince Lian clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles cracked as he roared furiously. Xianxia and Xianxia were trembling with fear. They quickly knelt on one knee and buried their heads in the ground, not daring to breathe. After a long period of silence, Grand Prince Lian finally calmed down and muttered to himself, "Vice-sect master's strength is on par with mine. The 3 elders are only in the 8th degree realm. As for those deacons and elite disciples, they are not even worth mentioning. Even if there are more than 10,000 people in the headquarters, they will not be enough for Xianxia to slaughter. If I really return to the headquarters, not only will it not be safe, but I will also be waiting for death." Hearing this, Xianxia and Xianxia were filled with anxiety and worry. The 2 of them quickly tried to comfort Prince Lian and help him come up with a plan. "Your Highness, please calm down. The sect master's arrangement is also for the Green Jade Palace. It is a great opportunity and we cannot miss it no matter what. Your Highness, the sect master's will is very firm. The competition between the 50 forces is also very fierce and the battle is about to break out. Under the current situation, the sect master will not send any experts back to the headquarters. How about this? We will not return to the headquarters. Instead, we will take a detour and secretly go to the Pure Wind County. Your secret palace is there." Hearing Xianxia's suggestion, Xianxia's eyes lit up and he quickly nodded in agreement. "That's right, Your Highness. We can go to the Pure Wind County. The mystic area is very hidden. Moreover, the people guarding the palace are your absolute confidants. It will be very safe." Prince Lian hesitated for a moment and seemed to be tempted. But after a moment of consideration he still shook his head and refused. Although the mystic area and palace in the Pure Wind County were secretly built by me many years ago as a precaution and a refuge, it is reasonable to say that the heavenly sect and the first prince do not know about it, so it should be very safe. But I can't go there. Xianxia and Xianxia were stunned and asked doubtfully, "Your Highness, why can't you go?" Prince Lian sneered and said with resentment, "Because you are my confidants." Chapter 3187. Although the journey was boring, Lin Shui persevered. For 20 days she steered the divine battleship alone. The result was just as Xianxia had expected. On the evening of the 20th day, the divine battleship finally arrived at the Thousand Sun Lake in the Thousand Sun County. This lake, which was located in the middle of the mountains, had a circumference of 100,000 miles. The lake water was deep and cold. Even the lightest feather could not float on the surface. Anything that fell into the Thousand Sun Lake would sink without a trace. The evening breeze blew, but the surface of the lake was like a mirror. There were no ripples. However, it was said that this mysterious Thousand Sun Lake was home to many powerful divine beasts. The lake was surrounded by towering mountains. Clouds and mist swirled around it, and the roars of beasts could be heard. The headquarters of the famous Heavenly Union sect in the Great Yan Empire was in the depths of the Thousand Sun Lake. Ordinary people did not even have the right to enter the Thousand Sun Lake, let alone see the Heavenly Union sect's headquarters. The thick mist on the lake covered everything 100 feet away. It was hazy and could not be seen clearly. The divine battleship stopped at the Thousand Sun Lake. Lin Shui heaved a sigh of relief and muttered to herself, "I've finally completed my mission and arrived at the Thousand Sun Lake. Now it's up to that lad." After saying that, she extended her divine perception to Ji Tianqing's secret chamber. She wanted to wake Ji Tianqing up. In the end, there was no one in the secret chamber. There was only a divine pagoda floating in the air. Lin Shui guessed that Ji Tianqing was cultivating in the divine pagoda but could not contact him. She could only wait patiently. That lad said that I would need 20 days to reach the Thousand Sun Lake. He should remember the time and end his seclusion, right? As she spoke, Lin Shui looked at the Thousand Sun Lake cautiously. She controlled the divine formation to make the divine battleship invisible. Soon, the divine battleship merged with the clouds in the sky and disappeared without a trace. While Lin Shui looked around cautiously, she waited patiently for Ji Tianqing to appear. At the same time, Ji Tianqing had been in seclusion for 3 years in the distorted spacetime of the divine pagoda. In the past 3 years, he had been trying to figure out the second level of the heaven-punishing divine skill. The first level of a cultivation technique was to establish one's foundation, while the second level of a cultivation technique sought for changes and breakthroughs. It contained even more laws and principles and possessed even greater might. Therefore, the deduction and perfection of the second level of the cultivation technique were extremely complicated and tedious. Fortunately, Ji Tianqing's 3 years of cultivation were fruitful. He had successfully deduced the second level of the heaven punishment divine skill. Of course, that was only the foundation and framework of the second layer of the cultivation method. The details weren't perfect enough, so it couldn't be considered a true success. If he wanted to complete and perfect the second layer of the cultivation technique, he would have to spend at least a few more years. Unfortunately, he didn't have that much time to continue comprehending the deity incantation. He didn't forget about the Thousand Sun Lake and the He Tian sect, so he ended his cultivation. This time he had been cultivating the heaven-punishing divine skill and deducing the second stage of the skill. He had not deliberately increased his strength. Even so, his strength and foundation continued to rise, becoming more and more robust. Even though he was still at the 8th level Divine Lord realm, he was not far from the 9th level Divine Lord realm. His true combat strength had also increased by more than 2 times compared to before. Swoosh. After finishing his cultivation, Ji Tianqing opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "Calculating the time, I have been in seclusion for 3 years, and 20 days have passed in the outside world. If nothing unexpected happened, Lin Shui should have arrived at the Thousand Sun Lake." With that, he got up and left the distorted space-time, returning to the secret chamber. After putting away the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda, he rushed to the cockpit of the deity vessel. As expected, the deity vessel stopped at the shore of a large lake. Lin Shui sat alone in the cockpit, observing the situation around her. Seeing that Ji Tianqing had arrived, Lin Shui obviously heaved a sigh of relief. She snorted unhappily and said, "I didn't disappoint you. I arrived at the Thousand Sun Lake on time. On the other hand, you were a bit slow. Why did you only come out now?" Ji Tianqing knew that she was just complaining and didn't have any ill intentions, so he ignored her. He used his divine perception to scan the surroundings. Seeing that it was quiet within 30,000 miles, and there were no traces of the deity race, he asked, "How long have you been here? Did you see anyone?" Lin Shui answered honestly, "I've been here for 2 hours. I've been observing the situation, but I didn't see anyone." Ji Tianqing nodded and frowned. Logically speaking, the entire Thousand Sun Lake is the He Tian sect's territory, so there should be guards patrolling the area. But why is there no one within a 30,000-mile radius? There must be something fishy about this. Lin Shui blinked and asked doubtfully, "What you mean is that Prince Lian returned to the He Tian sect before us, and he has already asked the He Tian sect to set up an ambush? So quiet around here. Is he trying to lure us in?" Ji Tianqing nodded and said, "It's possible. But there's another possibility. The He Tian sect's defense is weak. so they had no choice but to shrink their defense circle and withdraw everyone back into the mountain. Lin Shui was instantly stunned. She frowned in disbelief. How is this possible? The Hetian sect is one of the top 3 sects in the Great Yan Empire. They have at least 100 Sir Gods and 10 to 20,000 disciples and guards. How can their defense be weak? Especially the Grand Elder Sect Master and Deputy Sect Master of the Hetian sect. It's said that they are all Sir Gods at the peak of the 9th stage. Lin Shui did not know about the Green Jade Palace, so she thought that the Hetian sect's people were in the mountain. Ji Tianxing only smiled and did not explain further. It's useless for us to observe here. Let's save some time and go directly to the Hetian sect's mountain. Lin Shui hurriedly nodded in agreement. Okay, no matter whether the Hetian sect's mountain is weak or not, we will know once we try. You will control the divine worship and I will wake up Shui Huan and left emissary Jin. Shui Lin rubbed her palms together in an excited manner. Imagining the upcoming battle, she felt her blood boiling. Ji Tianxing had a premonition and could vaguely guess the result. He raised his hand and called out to Lin Shui, who was about to leave. Don't be anxious. Let me check the situation first. Don't let them fight for now. Although Lin Shui did not know what he meant, she still nodded in agreement. Swoosh. The divine warship passed through the clouds and flew toward the center of the Thousand Sun Lake at lightning speed. After about 15 minutes, the divine warship had flown more than 40,000 miles. The center of the Thousand Sun Lake was in front of them. On the surface of the water that was surrounded by clouds and mist, an island with a radius of more than 200 miles could be vaguely seen. The island was oval-shaped and the terrain was high in the north and low in the south. The south was close to the water and the north was grassland and forest. The north of the island was a majestic mountain range. Ji Tianxing could see clearly that there were many herb fields and gardens in the southern peninsula. There were also many divine beasts. In the mountain range of the northern peninsula, there were houses and palaces built on each mountain peak. They looked solemn and imposing. Without a doubt, that was the Hetian sect's mountain. The 3 ladies were traveling at night to meet with young Master Wan, an official's family. Tonight, young Master Wan had set up a banquet and invited all the local talents and beauties. First, domain name, please remember under he. Suddenly the frosty night sky changed from a cold pale white to a golden light, as if a sun that had been sealed for 10,000 years had suddenly broken free from its shackles and leaped into the sky. The coachman, old Huang, who was driving the carriage, suddenly couldn't see anything. In a panic, he hurriedly pulled on the reins. The 2 horses were abruptly reined in by him and reared up. Their 4 big hooves heavily smashed onto the ground with a paw sound, abruptly stopping the carriage. Ouch! The 3 girls in the carriage were caught off guard and almost fell out of the carriage because of the sudden stop. Fortunately, the 3 of them were squeezed together. Although the 3 girls' delicate bodies were light, how wide could an oil wall carriage be? Therefore, they didn't roll out of the carriage. If they fell and messed up their hair, it would be fine, but if they fell and hit the ground with their faces, it would ruin their beautiful faces. Old Huang, what's going on? Su Yaoyao was a little angry. She covered her face with her hand and blocked the strong light. She lifted the veil, bent over and stood on the carriage. Bai Su and Qingting followed. The 3 of them stood at the front of the carriage and looked up at the sky. As soon as they saw the strange scene in the sky, they were stunned. He saw a huge golden wheel-like object that looked like a heavenly king was hovering in the air. The light that was as bright as the sun was radiating from it. It swayed in the air as though it couldn't support itself. All of a sudden, the golden wheel-like object exploded. The huge shockwave was like ripples that quickly spread in all directions. The driver, old Huang, cried out in surprise. He rolled off the carriage like a lazy donkey and dove into the bottom of the carriage. On the other hand, Su Yaoyao, Bai Su and Qingting couldn't dodge in time, so the golden light passed through their bodies. The 3 beautiful girls swayed a little and fell to the ground. The golden light disappeared and so did the golden wheel in the sky. A few places were set on fire and smoke rose. The night returned to its cold state as the light shone on the 3 beautiful bodies. The night dew was sparkling and translucent. The grass was like a carpet, the pine trees were like a canopy, and the path was silent. The oily wagon stood there, and the 2 horses snorted blankly as if nothing had happened. Time flew by. 500 years later. The moon was high in the sky and the lanterns were lit. It was a lively time for Qinhuai. Beside the peach leaf fairy, a young man waved a small fan and walked over slowly. Many passers-by on the road would greet him warmly, "Brother Han." The young man would return their greetings with a smile and was very polite. Brother Han was dressed in a round neck robe with a leather belt around his waist. He wore a pair of legless headdress and a beautiful rose by his temples. It complemented his handsome face and made him look a little devilish. However, there was nothing he could do. This was the custom of the Song dynasty. From the emperor to the commoners, as long as they were men, they liked to wear flowers. The young man in front of him was tall and handsome. Even when he wasn't smiling, there was a hint of a smile on his face. It was slightly upturned and very likable. His pair of black and shiny eyebrows made his eyes look especially spirited and lively. It was as if he could speak as he looked around. He was different from those men who were covered in grease and insisted on wearing flowers. When young ladies and young wives saw him, they couldn't help but take a few more glances. This person's name was Yang Han. 3 days ago he was a member of the Nanjing Street Department of the Song dynasty. The street department was in charge of the city streets. Its functions and status were similar to the urban management of the later generations. However, the urban management of the Song dynasty had many functions. It was almost a combination of policing, environmental protection, taxation, fire control, price inspection, industrial and commercial law enforcement, greening and cleaning, and handling illegal road occupation. Those who could do this were either a scoundrel like Nyo Air who could control people or a slick person who knew how to steer according to the wind. However, when he really had to fight with people, he had to be a good fighter. Not only could he bend and stretch, but he also had to be soft and hard. Yang Han belonged to the latter. He was eloquent, alert, and had good martial arts. Although he was a commoner at the bottom of society, the 300 years of the Song dynasty were the best and wealthiest dynasty among all the dynasties. If you didn't have the ambition to become a marquis and conquer the world, you just wanted to be a commoner. Or if you only had the ability to be a commoner, then you were born in the Song dynasty and had cultivated merit for several generations. In other dynasties, the lives of commoners were far inferior. Therefore, Yang Han, a little urban management of the Song dynasty's Jiankang city, lived a very interesting life. Unfortunately, 3 days ago he lost this fat job. It wasn't that Yang Han was impartial and offended some big shot. It wasn't that he met a scoundrel with some background and couldn't continue working. It was because the head of the street department, Master Li, had taken a fancy to him and wanted to marry his daughter to him. The head of the department was equivalent to the captain of the urban management team. Shang Yunqi, the 3 elders and the deacons were all stunned. They found it unbelievable. This is so strange. How can we not hit him? Shang Yunqi frowned and ordered another attack. Therefore he, the elders and the deacons worked together to control the sect protecting Grand Array again. They released the destructive light of the sacred tree and attacked Ji Tianxing. Sword shadows and giant blades thousands of feet long rained down like a storm. All kinds of divine flames, icicles, lightning and divine power shadows lit up the night sky, dazzling and eye-catching. This sect protecting Grand Array, which was said to be invincible below the divine king level, released its strongest power, which could destroy tens of thousands of miles. However, a strange scene appeared again. The sky full of divine attacks and sword shadows all passed through Ji Tianxing's shadow and scattered in the thousand-sun lake. Boom, boom, boom. Boom. A deafening explosion resounded through the sky. The surface of the lake, which was thousands of miles long, was shaking ceaselessly, rolling up huge waves that soared into the sky and splashing out a watery mist that blotted out the sun. However, Ji Tianxing was still unharmed. This time Shang Yunqi, the 3 elders and the 12 deacons opened their eyes wide and saw it clearly. Everyone was finally sure that it wasn't an illusion. It was real. Instantly, everyone was inexplicably shocked. Their hearts were in turmoil and they couldn't help but exclaim. Damn it! How can this be? What the hell? Why can't we hit him? Despicable beast, what kind of sorcery did he use? While everyone was shocked, their fear grew stronger and stronger. They didn't know what to do. Shang Yunqi didn't give up. He continued to control the sect protecting Grand Array and attacked 8 times in a row. The result didn't change at all. He completely gave up. Knowing that Ji Tianxing was immune to all attacks, he gave up on attacking. Forget it. That kid's sorcery is too strange. No matter how we attack, it's useless. The only thing we can do now is to support the sect protecting Grand Array and stop him from breaking it. Chapter 3190. Shang Yunqi, the elders and deacons couldn't do anything to Ji Tianxing. They also understood that as long as Ji Tianxing maintained his transparent and blurry state, he would be invincible. No matter how powerful their attacks were, they couldn't hurt Ji Tianxing at all. Since that was the case, they could only stop attacking and focus on the defense of the sect. Shang Yunqi made up his mind to use the power of the sect's defensive array to compete with Ji Tianxing in patience. They would see who could last until the end. Once Ji Tianxing ran out of divine power and couldn't maintain his transparent and blurry state, it would be the best time for them to counterattack. Shang Yunqi had reason to believe that no matter how strong Ji Tianxing was, he couldn't break the sect's defensive array. He was very confident in the sect's defensive array. Together with him, the elders, deacons, disciples and guards, they would definitely be able to defend the mountain gate. Sush, sush. Shang Yunqi, the 3 elders and the 12 deacons worked together to release dazzling divine light and infuse it into the sect's defensive array. Instantly, the 5-colored light shield within a radius of more than 100 miles became even more dazzling. The divine array sped up and its power increased by 30%. Its defense also became stronger. However, the sect's defensive array only strengthened its defense and didn't release any attacks. This didn't affect Ji Tianxing much. He stood in the sky as usual and focused on breaking the divine array. He formed a divine seal with both hands and waved it as fast as lightning. He continuously shot out divine light and infused it into the various meridians and nodes of the divine array. Under his control, the sect's defensive array was disintegrating. The meridians and nodes of the array were also destroyed and its power kept weakening. Therefore, the 2 sides engaged in a different kind of competition. Shang Yunqi, the elders and deacons worked hard to increase the power of the sect's defensive array and replenish it with divine power. Meanwhile, Ji Tianxing kept destroying the internal structure of the array, causing its power to weaken continuously. At the beginning, Shang Yunqi and the others tried their best and could barely keep up with Ji Tianxing's destructive speed. The 2 sides were barely at a stalemate. The sect's defensive array was weakening at an extremely slow speed. However, after only 30 minutes, Shang Yunqi and the others couldn't hold on any longer. They couldn't use their full power for a long period of time, so the power of the protective formation naturally weakened. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was as calm as ever as he broke the formation and disintegrated the structure of the formation in an orderly fashion. As a result, the speed at which the power of the sect-protecting grand formation weakened gradually increased. An hour later. Chapter 3191. Shang Yunqi, the 3 elders and several deacons flew dozens of miles away with blood spurting out of their bodies, crashing into the dense forest with a loud bang. Instantly, several large pits were smashed out of the forest, sending dust and wood chips flying all over the sky. Everyone landed in a sorry state with dusty faces and bloodstains all over their bodies. Their hearts were filled with shock. The other deacons and the thousands of disciples and guards were all shocked. All of them revealed a look of horror, their eyes filled with disbelief. Although everyone knew that Ji Tianxing's strength was very strong, they had not seen it before. They had never seen it with their own eyes, so they did not have a specific measure in their hearts. They never would have thought that Ji Tianxing was actually powerful to such an extent. Deputy Sect Master Shang Yunqi and the 3 elders were all veteran high-level divine lords. Their strength and foundation were very strong. And those deacons were also all 5th-level Divine Lord realm and above. Everyone joined forces to attack, but they could not even block one move from Ji Tianxing and were beaten until their bodies were covered in blood. What kind of terrifying combat strength was this? Looking at the entire mountain gate of Hetian sect, who else could resist Ji Tianxing? Thinking of this, everyone's hearts were covered in a haze, their mood depressed and desperate. At this time, the other deacons also came back to their senses. They roared in grief and indignation, waving their swords and sabers to give orders. All disciples and guards, listen up. Swear to defend the dignity of He Tian sect to the death. Kill. Our heads can be broken, blood can flow, but we would rather die standing than live kneeling. Charge. Want to destroy He Tian sect? Then you'll have to step over our dead bodies. As they roared, the 7 deacons charged at Ji Tianxing with the mentality of facing death with equanimity. The thousands of disciples and guards were also affected by the emotions of the deacons. Everyone was filled with pessimism and despair, and they launched a suicidal attack with the determination to die. Kill. It's time to repay the sect. Never give in, fight to the last moment. Many disciples and guards shouted heroic words and erupted with their strongest strength. Swoosh, swoosh. Thousands of blade lights and sword shadows instantly illuminated the night sky for thousands of miles around. The entire island was illuminated and everyone's expression could be seen clearly. Everyone joined forces to besiege Ji Tianxing, releasing saber lights and sword shadows that poured down like a torrential flood, drowning his figure. However, a scene that made everyone despair appeared. Ji Tianxing, who was still very normal just a moment ago, once again used that evil divine ability. He became transparent and blurry. The sky full of divine attacks passed through him without any hindrance and scattered on the ground. Instantly, the grasslands and forests within 100 miles were blasted into ruins, leaving behind countless deep pits and ravines. Endless dust rose into the night sky and covered the entire island. The destructive impact caused the entire island to sway and shake violently. There was no doubt about the result. The island was heavily damaged. Half of the grasslands and forests were in ruins, but Ji Tianxing was safe and sound. Seizing this opportunity, he brandished the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and sword radiance filled the sky as he attacked the numerous disciples and guards. Bang! 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 Sword radiance flashed and sword chi filled the sky. The night sky was in chaos and blood splattered everywhere. The crowd was cut into pieces by the sword radiance, and countless broken limbs and blood splattered everywhere. At least 200 disciples and guards were killed on the spot by the sword radiance. Their bodies fell from the night sky and smashed into the ruins. There were even 4 unlucky deacons with the strength of a low-level divine lord who were killed on the spot by the sword radiance. In the blink of an eye, a quarter of the mighty group was gone, and their morale plummeted. Everyone was shocked and hesitant. They didn't dare to attack with all their might. At this time, the injured Xianxia, 3 elders and 5 deacons charged back without any regard for their own safety. Thief, I'll kill you. Give me your life. I'll tear you to pieces. Xianxia and the others roared angrily and attacked even more crazily. They used their ultimate killing moves to besiege Ji Tianxing. This time, Ji Tianxing didn't even bother to use the everlasting sky of turbidity. He directly faced them head-on. He used his left hand to use the dragon-elephant divine fist, and a mountain-sized dragon-elephant image smashed everyone's divine skill into pieces. He waved his right hand and stabbed 99 times, releasing a destructive sword intent and divine power that enveloped Xianxia and the others. Bang! 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 99 rainbow sword radiances tore through the night sky like lightning. They were extremely fast. Xianxia and the others' divine souls were locked on, and they didn't even have a chance to escape. They were hit instantly. Bang! 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 The sword radiances pierced through everyone's divine bodies, and a series of muffled sounds echoed in the night sky. Xianxia's strength was relatively strong, and he managed to dodge the attack at the crucial moment, not letting the sword light strike his head. Even so, his abdomen and thigh were pierced by 2 sword radiances. His left leg was cut off on the spot and there was a huge bloody hole in his abdomen. It was a shocking sight. However, he was secretly glad that he managed to keep his divine body in life. The other 3 elders and 5 deacons ended up in a much more miserable state. The 5 deacons' divine bodies were pierced through by the sword radiances, and they exploded into pieces, splattering blood everywhere. Even their divine sparks were shattered by the sword radiances and scattered in the night sky. 2 of the 3 elders were also killed. Their divine bodies and divine sparks were shattered. Only 1 elder managed to survive, but his divine body was shattered, and his divine sparks escaped into the distance. Therefore, the strongest people in this team were only Xianxia and the 3 deacons. The remaining 700 disciples and guards were all below the Divine Lord realm. They could only be cannon fodder. For a moment the night sky quieted down. Shang Yunqi breathed heavily as he circulated his energy to suppress his injuries. The 3 injured deacons also hurriedly took divine pills. As for the disciples and guards, they held their weapons and surrounded Ji Tianxing, but they didn't dare to attack. Both sides were in a stalemate. As long as Ji Tianxing attacked again, he would be able to kill everyone in a few moves. At this moment, a divine light that blotted out the sky lit up in the mountains 100 miles away. There were densely packed figures, like fireflies that filled the sky, rushing over while shouting. Ji Tianxing, Shang Yunqi, and the others saw clearly with a sweep of their divine senses. Those were thousands of Zhou Xian sect disciples. Most of them were outer sect disciples, and there were also a large number of servants, guards, and odd job workers. In short, they were all a motley crew below the 7th level celestial god realm. Of course, although those 6,000 people were weak, their will was as strong as an impregnable fortress, and they charged over bravely. This made Shang Yunqi, the deacons and disciples feel warmth in their hearts. They were touched and proud. At the very least, at the juncture of life and death, the Zhou Xian sect disciples were very unyielding and didn't embarrass the sect. However, Shang Yunqi closed his eyes in pain, hot tears flowing down his face. He struggled painfully in his heart, and after weighing the pros and cons for a moment, he made a decision that the disciples and guards found unbelievable. Chapter 3192. Just when the deacons, disciples and guards were feeling proud and excited, Shang Yunqi, who was at the front of the crowd, suddenly bowed deeply to Ji Tianxing. He lowered his head and suppressed the great humiliation and anger, and said in a trembling voice, "Young Master Tianxing, I admit defeat. Although it is said that you are cruel, bloodthirsty and evil, I believe in you. However, I believe in my own judgment. I definitely won't misjudge someone. A peerless expert with such outstanding talent and tyrannical strength like you must have the demeanor and bearing of an expert. I am willing to admit defeat on the spot. I only beg you to let these innocent disciples and guards go, and let the Xian sect live." Although Shang Yunqi's voice was not loud, it spread clearly throughout the island. At that instant, over 700 disciples and guards were stunned on the spot as if they had been petrified. Even the 6,000+ disciples, guards and odd job workers who were hurrying over a few dozen kilometers away stopped in their tracks. Everyone's faces were filled with astonishment. They thought they had misheard. Everyone could not believe that the deputy sect leader, who had always been high and mighty, actually surrendered to the enemy. Moreover, the deputy sect leader wanted to commit suicide on the spot in exchange for the lives of everyone and preserve the foundation of the Xian sect. This was simply unbelievable. If they did not hear it with their own ears, they would never believe that these words came from the deputy sect leader's mouth. At this moment, it was not only Shang Yunqi's shame. Countless disciples, guards and handymen of the Xian sect, a total of more than 10,000 people, felt extremely humiliated and angry. So, after everyone came to their senses, they immediately burst into earth-shattering shouts. Countless disciples and guards desperately tried to persuade and stop Shang Yunqi. "Deputy sect leader, why did you surrender to the thief? Didn't we say that we would rather die standing than live kneeling? Deputy sect leader, we can still fight, please don't surrender. We would rather fight to the death with the enemy than surrender in humiliation. My life was given by the Xian sect. Today I will return it to the Xian sect. Please allow me to fight. I will also fight to the last moment and live and die with the sect. Deputy sect leader, how can you surrender? Where is the dignity and backbone of our sect?" Not only the disciples, but the 3 surviving deacons were also agitated and tried to dissuade Shang Yunqi. However, Shang Yunqi remained unmoved and continued to maintain a bowing posture. The commotion became more and more ferocious. More than 6,000 disciples and odd job workers arrived, and the scene became even more chaotic. The discussions and dissuasion of thousands of people converged into a huge sound wave torrent that was deafening. Seeing this, Shang Yunqi decisively shouted angrily, "Silence! Everyone should be quiet. Where is the decency?" The dignified and oppressive sound waves enveloped the entire island. Everyone shut their mouths and the night sky quieted down. Shang Yunqi then looked at Ji Tianxing and earnestly said, "Young Master Tianxing, you and Grand Prince Lian have a deep enmity that will not end until one of you is dead. Prince Lian is the head disciple of our sect, so it's reasonable for you to deal with our sect. However, this is between you, Prince Lian, and us. Please do not involve the innocent disciples and odd job workers. I also understand that you want to cut the weeds and eliminate the roots to prevent future trouble. This is human nature. However, you are a top expert and only the top divine lords are worthy of being your opponent. These 10,000 disciples, odd job workers and servants are all old, weak, sick and disabled. They pose no threat to you at all. You are a top expert. Don't tell me you don't even have this little bit of tolerance? Young Master Tianxing, please be merciful and allow me to kill myself on the spot and you can leave now. Young Master, please grant my wish." Shang Yunqi's tone was very sincere and he bowed deeply after speaking. The 6,000 disciples, guards and odd job workers no longer clamored, discussed or dissuaded him. No matter how stupid they were, they understood the deputy sect leader's good intentions. Sacrificing him in exchange for the survival of more than 10,000 people and preserving the foundation of the Xianxia sect. This was definitely a great profit. As long as everyone was still alive, the Xianxia sect still existed, and the Xianxia sect would not perish. In the future, when the sect leader, grand elder and the elites of the sect returned, the Xianxia sect would be able to recover to its peak. In fact, the sect leader and grand supreme elder could even kill Tianxing to avenge those who had died. Thinking of this, everyone fell silent. Everyone looked at Shang Yunqi with eyes full of gratitude and admiration. However, Shang Yunqi's idea was good, but the decision was not in his hands. Everyone's eyes gathered on Ji Tianxing, waiting for his decision. Under the gaze of tens of thousands of people, Ji Tianxing stared at Shang Yunqi indifferently and said in a cold tone, "Shang Yunqi, you are indeed a cunning old fox. You know how to choose and weigh the pros and cons. That's right. I came today with no intention of letting you go. You will undoubtedly die. But you know that if you fight to the end, the Xianxia sect will be completely wiped out and the mountain will no longer exist. At that time, you and Prince Lian will be the sinners who caused the destruction of the Xianxia sect, and you will go down in history in infamy. Therefore you choose to kill yourself on the spot. Not only can you save everyone's lives and the Xianxia sect's foundation, but you can also win a good reputation. You are really calculating." Ji Tianxing exposed Shang Yunqi's thoughts, but Shang Yunqi did not refute. He bowed again and said in a sincere tone, "Young Master Tianxing, please be magnanimous and grant me my wish." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. His lips curled into a cold smile as he said, "Good. I can grant you your wish and allow you to kill yourself on the spot. However, you have to hand over Prince Lian or tell me his whereabouts. Otherwise, I will still kill everyone here, destroy this island and erase the name of the heavenly sect from existence." Ji Tianxing had already expected that Prince Lian might not be here. After such a long battle and such a big commotion, Prince Lian would have appeared if he was in the sect. As expected, Shang Yunqi hesitated for a moment before saying in a trembling voice, "With your strength and means, you will definitely be a top expert in the great Yan Empire in the future. I will believe you this time. Prince Lian did not return to the Thousand Sun Lake, nor is he in the sect. The last time I contacted him was 3 days ago. He said in the Jade Slip that the sect's defense is weak and might not be able to withstand your attack. Therefore he will not return to the sect. He will find another place to hide. That's all I know." Ji Tianxing immediately frowned and sneered disdainfully. "Shang Yunqi, do you still dare to hide the truth from me? I will give you one last chance. You know what I mean." Shang Yunqi's expression changed and he frowned deeply. His eyes were filled with melancholy and struggle. Although what he said was the truth, he did have some reservations and didn't reveal everything. Since Ji Tianxing was so shrewd, he could not hide it anymore. He could only send a voice transmission. "Young Master Tianxing, I really don't know where Prince Lian is. He is very cautious. How can he tell me this secret that concerns his life? However, I can tell you that he only has 3 choices now. Ji Tianxing lost interest in talking and said coldly, "Shang Yunqi, this monarch is very disappointed in you. You seem to be very sincere. You want to use your life to exchange for everyone's life, and you also want to protect the foundation of the Xianxia sect. But in reality you've been hiding the truth from me. As for the 3 choices you mentioned, this monarch already knew about them and already had an answer in his heart. Now you haven't fulfilled my request, so... Hearing this, Shang Yunqi's expression changed dramatically, and his eyes widened in horror. He glared at Ji Tianxing and roared at the top of his lungs, "No. Tianxing, you can't go back on your words and go back on your words. You've already agreed to my request in front of everyone. Now you want to go back on your words? Aren't you afraid of being ridiculed by the world and sullied your reputation? Moreover, the 3 possibilities I told you have a high chance of success. That's the only place left for Prince Lian." Fortunately, the 2 of them had been talking through telepathy and no one else had heard it. Otherwise, there were more than 6,000 disciples, guards and odd job workers present. Once the news of the Green Jade Palace was leaked, it would quickly spread. At that time, the 50 factions alliance would be destroyed, and it would lead to disputes and chaos. If the various factions traced the source and found out that it was the He Tian sect who leaked the news, the result could be imagined. The He Tian sect would not only be expelled from the 50 factions, but they would also become the target of public criticism. In any case, Shang Yunqi could not bear this responsibility. Ji Tianxing stared at Shang Yunqi sharply and said in a deep voice, "Shang Yunqi, I did promise you and give you a chance. But that's based on the fact that you don't hold anything back and are honest and straightforward. Unfortunately, you've been hiding the truth and trying to deceive me. Don't blame me for being ruthless." Shang Yunqi was trembling with anger and his face was pale. He shouted angrily, "Then what do you want?" Ji Tianxing said in a dignified tone, "It's very simple. Either you kill yourself and I'll leave after killing all 6,000 people present. The remaining 10,000 people and the He Tian sect's wealth will all be preserved. Or you resist and I'll kill everyone, completely destroy this island and the He Tian sect." Shang Yunqi was so angry that his eyes almost popped out. He shouted, "You've gone too far." "So what?" Ji Tianxing sneered contemptuously. "Don't forget your situation. The decision is in my hands and your life and death are in my hands. You..." Shang Yunqi was speechless for a moment. He was so angry that he could not speak. However, he also understood that what Ji Tianxing said was reasonable. If he was Ji Tianxing, he would not even give the chance to kill himself. He would definitely kill everyone and destroy the He Tian sect. Cutting the weeds and eliminating the roots was a wise move. Ji Tianxing was willing to give him a chance and preserve the He Tian sect's wealth. This was already very benevolent. After a long silence, Shang Yunqi's anger gradually dissipated. He seemed to have been drained of all his strength. He raised his head in a daze and glanced at the audience with dim eyes. Finally, his gaze returned to Ji Tianxing and he smiled bitterly. "You win. Everyone here and I will all die. But this is the bottom line of the He Tian sect. Please keep your promise. Otherwise, even if we die, we will curse you forever." Ji Tianxing sneered. "No matter what, I have a bottom line more than all of you." Hearing this, Shang Yunqi was relieved. He smiled hopelessly and said, "Thank you, goodbye." When his voice fell, he used all his power to shatter his godhead. Bang! With a muffled sound, his body exploded on the spot and blood splattered all over the sky. 12 pieces of godhead shards also flew in the blood rain and scattered in the night sky. The deputy sect master of the He Tian sect, an 8th degree realm upper divine monarch, committed suicide in front of everyone. More than 6,000 disciples, guards and odd job workers roared in pain, anger and unwillingness. Countless people's eyes were scarlet red. They waved their swords wildly and charged towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing did not waste any time. He waved his hand and activated the Heaven Punishment Sword Array, summoning 25,000 divine swords. They covered the sky and covered the earth, enveloping everyone in the field. Chapter 3194. Bang! Bang bang bang. The sky was full of divine swords, blooming with dazzling divine light, drowning more than 6,000 people. Tens of thousands of swords shuttled back and forth, sword chi crisscrossing the area within 100 miles. Deafening muffled sounds, painful screams and angry shouts converged into a huge sound wave torrent, shaking the entire island. Such a terrifying movement lasted for a full 10 breaths before gradually dissipating. More than 100 miles away, The tens of thousands of people hiding in the mountain gate of the Hutian sect trembled in fear when they saw the sword light that blotted out the sky. They didn't know the specific situation and only thought that Ji Tianxing was on a killing spree and that no one could stop him. The experts and elite disciples guarding the sect were all dead. Even the outer sect disciples, guards and handymen with average combat strength were slaughtered. The remaining tens of thousands of people were old, weak, sick and disabled, and their strength was not worth mentioning. They all had a premonition that when Ji Tianxing came, they would die without a burial place. Therefore, an atmosphere of despair shrouded the entire Hutian sect. However, the development of things was not what they expected. After 10 breaths, the tens of thousands of giant swords that blotted out the sky disappeared. Heaven and earth returned to silence. More than 6,000 disciples, guards and handymen were turned into a rain of blood and powder, scattered in the ruins. They were all dead and no one was left alive. Only a white-robed figure was left standing alone in the night sky. He glanced at the mountain gate of the Hutian sect, turned around and quickly disappeared into the night sky. There was a dead silence in the mountain gate. Tens of thousands of people held their breath, waiting for death to come. 20 breaths, 50 breaths, 100 breaths passed. The entire island was silent, and there was no divine light or sound. That frightening white-robed figure also disappeared without a trace. Nearly 10,000 disciples and servants of the Hutian sect gradually came to their senses. The fear and despair in their hearts slowly dissipated, and many people tried to fly out of the mountain gate to explore the outside world with their divine sense. When they found that Ji Tianxing had left the island, they immediately burst into cheers of joy. Countless people showed a relieved expression, and their faces were full of the joy of surviving a disaster. The black divine ship flew in the night sky, heading straight to the east. In the cockpit of the divine warship, Ji Tianxing sat at the side, silently thinking about something. Lin Shui was in charge of steering the ship, but she was not focused. She kept turning her head to observe Ji Tianxing's reaction. The atmosphere had been silent for an hour. Shui Lin finally couldn't help but ask, "Hey, did you really keep your promise and let go of the Heavenly Union sect? That was tens of thousands of people as well as countless resources and wealth. In any case, you already have a death feud with the Hetian sect. How can you let them go? Aren't you too stupid?" Ji Tianxing was still thinking about the problem and did not answer. Lin Shui was so angry that she snorted and said gloomily, "Fine. I know you're a peerless genius, a peerless expert. In the future your name will definitely spread throughout the Northern Heaven region. As a super monster, of course you would cherish your reputation and wouldn't be willing to be a treacherous villain. But have you ever thought about it? Hetian sect master and the elite powerhouses are still alive. When they find out about what happened tonight, they will definitely seek you for revenge. If you show mercy to the people of the Hetian sect, you're being cruel to yourself." Ji Tianxing did not want to listen to her nagging anymore. He could not help but say, "There are more than 10,000 people from the Hetian sect. Those who could fight were killed by me. Those who are still alive are as weak as ants. They're no threat to us. Let's put aside the matter between Prince Lian and the Hetian sect for now. Focus on steering the ship. We'll head to the imperial capital as soon as possible." Lin Shui frowned and asked, "What's the matter? Why do you have to go to the imperial capital? You know the Emperor of Great Yan is wary of you. If you appear in the imperial capital, he'll definitely explode." "So what?" Ji Tianxing raised an eyebrow and said nonchalantly, "I'm not going to do anything to him. I'm just asking him about something. Only an expert on the level of the Emperor of Great Yan can answer my questions." Lin Shui nodded, half understanding. She said helplessly, "All right. Since you insist on going, what can I do? What about after you're done in the imperial capital? Where do you plan to go?" Ji Tianxing replied without hesitation, "I'm going to look for Prince Lian, of course." Lin Shui asked with a puzzled expression, "I've asked you a few times but you wouldn't tell me. Where are the sect master of the Hetian sect and the elites of the Hetian sect hiding? What are they doing? If you didn't show mercy, their base would have been destroyed. Why aren't they sending reinforcements? Could it be that what they're doing is more important than the Hetian sect's tens of thousands of years of foundation?" Ji Tianxing nodded solemnly. Lin Shui was even more surprised. She asked in disbelief, "Are you serious? What are they doing?" Ji Tianxing explained, "In the northwest of the Great Yan Empire, in the depths of the Cloud Sea mystic realm, a god king's cave abode was discovered. Suddenly hearing this news, Shui Lin's eyes widened, revealing an extremely shocked expression. Then realization dawned on her face. She nodded and said, "I see. No wonder the sect master of the Xian sect took away most of the elites and left their base behind. It's a god king's cave abode. If the Xian sect successfully enters the cave abode and obtains the god king's inheritance, divine weapons and secret techniques, that's terrifying. It won't be long before the Xian sect can nurture a god king. There's no god king in the entire Great Yan Empire. Once the Xian sect has a god king, they'll be able to dominate the Great Yan Empire and even replace it." Shui Lin was well aware of the stakes involved. She knew better than anyone how attractive a god king's cave abode was. However, Ji Tianqing added, "The god king's cave abode is called the god king's cave abode. It's the god king's cave abode. It's the god king's cave abode from 10,000 years ago. The god king came from the Great Yan Empire and was famous in the northern region. However, he disappeared 10,000 years ago. The first to discover the god king's cave abode was from the other factions. When the news spread, all the top factions in the Great Yan Empire wanted a piece of the pie. Even the Great Yan imperial family wanted to take it for themselves. However, more than 40 factions resisted stubbornly. The Great Yan imperial family had no choice but to compromise. In the end, 50 factions formed an alliance and joined forces to explore the god king's cave abode. They've been researching it for more than 9 years. When she heard this, Lin Shui was taken aback. She frowned with a strange expression. "Is there something wrong with the sect master of the Xian sect? What are the chances of the Xian sect succeeding when 50 factions are fighting over the God King's Green Jade Palace? Is it necessary to give up their base just for the God King's Green Jade Palace?" Ji Tianqing waved his hand and said, "You're wrong. The 50 factions are divided into their strengths and weaknesses. There's no doubt that the Great Yan imperial family is the most powerful, followed by the 9 great sects and the noble clans. These 10 factions are the most powerful ones. The other 40 factions are just there to serve as a contrast. Moreover, after the 50 alliances open the God King's Green Jade Palace, they won't swarm in. They'll draw lots and compete to select a portion of them to enter the palace." Chapter 3195. After listening to Ji Tianqing's explanation, Lin Shui roughly understood. She nodded slightly and said, "I see. In other words, the top 10 factions will most likely be able to enter the Divine Palace. As for the other 40 factions, they are just there to serve as a foil. It will be very difficult for them to enter the Divine Palace. The Heavenly Unity sect is one of the top 10 factions and has more than a 90% chance of entering the Divine Palace. Therefore, the Heavenly Unity sect master treats the Green Jade Palace as a treasure that can turn the situation around and refuses to give it up." "That's right." Ji Tianqing nodded and added, "To the Heavenly Unity sect master, as long as he and the elite forces are still there, the Heavenly Unity sect will not be destroyed. Most of the people guarding the sect are burdens and trash. They will not feel bad even if they die. When he enters the Green Jade Palace and obtains the Green Jade Supreme Being's inheritance and mystic techniques, the Heavenly Unity sect will be able to rise again. By then, the Heavenly Unity sect will be even more glorious and powerful. It will not be a problem to recruit as many disciples, guards, and servants as it wants." Lin Shui pursed her lips and said disdainfully, "In that case, the Heavenly Unity sect master is really a good-for-nothing. He doesn't care about the lives of his disciples at all." Ji Tianqing chuckled and said, "Do you think everyone is as stupid as you? Before disbanding the Bloodblade sect, you gave away all your wealth?" Lin Shui's pretty face turned red, but she straightened her neck and asked, "So what? I gave away my wealth. Who can stop me?" Ji Tianqing was speechless. Lin Shui had won the argument. Seeing his helpless and bitter smile, she was very pleased and proud. At the same time, at the northwest border of the Great Yan Empire, there was a region of clouds that spanned 1,000,000 miles. There were endless mountains and forests in the world, but they were all covered by clouds. This region was called the Cloud Sea Mystic Realm. This mystic realm was very special. It looked like it was formed by clouds and there was nothing special about it. However, in fact, this cloud sea had existed for tens of thousands of years and had never disappeared. The Cloud Sea contained a special power that seemed to be able to distort space. Countless experts had entered it, but it was as if they had fallen into a maze and could not walk out. Those who had specially entered the Cloud Sea to take the risk to explore the secret of the Cloud Sea often did not know how to do it. Once they entered the Sea of Clouds, they would lose their sense of direction. It would be difficult for them to distinguish north from south, front from back, left from right. After making a few rounds and flying for a certain distance, he would strangely appear outside the Cloud Sea. If that was all there was to it, the Sea of Clouds wouldn't be attractive enough. It would just be a little strange. However, in the tens of thousands of years since ancient times, there were always some lucky people who managed to enter the Cloud Sea secret realm and leave alive. Moreover, they had obtained all sorts of fortuitous encounters in the Cloud Sea secret realm. Some people picked up the secrets of divine abilities, some obtained half of a divine art, some picked up divine weapons, some gained enlightenment, and some were enlightened by the divine king in their dreams. Of course, there were also people who obtained powerful divine beasts or rare treasures in the Cloud Sea secret realm. Most of the various legends had been verified and proved to be real. This attracted countless supreme Tao powerhouses to advance dauntlessly and enter the Cloud Sea secret realm to explore. Even if 70 to 80% of the people who entered the secret realm would die, it could not stop the greed of the adventurers. At this moment, in the deepest part of the Cloud Sea secret realm, the blazing sun shone on the boundless sea of clouds, causing the sea of clouds to be hazy with 5 colors. It was magnificent and magnificent. In the middle of the brilliant halo, there was a transparent, illusory and hazy divine palace, emitting a faint divine light. It was impossible to see the shadow of the divine palace from 1,000 miles away. Even if it was 1,000 miles away, it could not be seen clearly. It was blurry and hazy. The image of the mysterious divine palace was like a mirage. It was close at hand, but it was far away and untouchable. Outside the lofty divine palace, there were tall and solemn palace walls. In the sea of clouds surrounding the palace walls, there were 50 balls of 5-colored divine light scattered. There were hundreds to thousands of people in each 5-colored light shield. They were all elite powerhouses and powerhouses. Obviously, those were the 50 powerhouses of the Alliance, the most powerful forces of the Great Yan Empire. The gate of the palace walls had long been opened, and the defense divine array had been broken. Close to 100 Sir God powerhouses with different appearances and extraordinary clothes were surrounding the huge bronze gate of the divine palace. Although there were many people, the scene was very quiet and not noisy. Many of the overlords looked serious and focused. They silently observed the huge bronze gate and whispered a few words occasionally. Yi Wuji, the sect master of the Hetian sect, was also among the crowd. He was fully focused on observing the defense divine array. Many people thought that the sect master of the Hetian sect must be a white-haired elder. Even if he was a bit younger, he would be a middle-aged divine clan member. But in fact, Yi Wuji had a technique to retain his youthful appearance. He looked like he was only about 30 years old. He was wearing a dark purple robe embroidered with fire phoenixes and golden patterns. He was tall and strong, and his face was handsome and resolute. He exuded the majesty and dominance of a superior. Even though he and Prince Lian were master and disciple, when the two of them stood together, they looked more like brothers. At this moment, a white-haired elder in a purple robe hurried to the huge bronze gate with a serious expression. He came to Yi Wuji with a serious face, bowed respectfully and said, "Sect Master, something bad has happened." This fat white-haired elder was the Grand Elder of the Hetian sect and Yi Wuji's right-hand man. Yi Wuji's thoughts were interrupted by the Grand Elder, but he didn't get angry. He turned around and glanced at the Grand Elder. Seeing the Grand Elder's pale face and the sadness and anger in his eyes, Yi Wuji raised his eyebrows. "Grand Elder, you're so old, but you still don't have enough patience. Although you're trying your best to suppress the anger and murderous intent in your heart. But people with discerning eyes can still see some clues." Yi Wuji turned around and continued to stare at the huge bronze gate, carefully observing the divine array. Seeing his reaction, the Grand Elder became anxious. He couldn't help but say in a more serious tone, "Sect Master, something big has really happened. Why are you still in the mood to educate me?" Yi Wuji turned his back to him and asked calmly, "What happened? Was Yonglian killed on the way? Or did God of killing Tianxing break into the Thousand Sun Lake?" The Grand Elder couldn't wait to say, "Last night that bastard broke into the Thousand Sun Lake, broke the sect-protecting array of our sect and killed more than 7,000 people. The 3 elders, 12 deacons and all the elite disciples, outer disciples and guards who stayed in the sect were all killed. Even the vice-sect master was forced to commit suicide in public by that bastard." Yi Wuji couldn't help but tremble when he heard the news. No matter how calm Yi Wuji was, he couldn't help but tremble. His calm face froze in an instant. He narrowed his eyes and a cold light flashed in his eyes. If one looked closely, they would find that his eyes were full of shock and disbelief. However, other than that, Yi Wuji didn't have any other reaction. After 3 breaths of silence, he suppressed his surprise and anger and said in a low voice, "All of us underestimated that guy. He deserves the title of God of Killing." Translator. Transin Editor. Transin. You're tuning in to the Zhou Xian's Legacy YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.